Visit Lord Varys later to learn everything possible about the two gods and make sure, therefore, that word of her ability to wield fire passed unnoticed, or the gods only knew what could happen. As soon as Jaime turned to corner, Vial let go of the torch and cradled her hand to her chest. The flesh of her palm and back was marred by a nasty-looking burn, red and angry. It looked like Vial had just learned the limits of her tolerance and resistance to fire. Brandon would be furious were he to learn of it. She turned to Sir Roderick. "Send one of your men to Varys," she ordered, discreetly. "I need to meet with him," she added. Sir Roderick nodded and stepped to her, as Vial fumbled with her handkerchief around her right burned hand. He helped her secure the cloth to her flaming hand and told her, "I will call for that maester you like so much." He told her, "We can trust him to keep your secret," he added. Vial nodded. "Thank you," she said softly. He murmured something in reply and pushed the doors open for her. As soon as Vial stepped inside, her niece jumped up and ran to her. Fat tears were flowing down her chubby cheeks and she was clearly scared. She knelt on the ground and caught Rhaenys the moment the child threw herself at her. "Ah, sweeterling, what happened?" "It's mommy," she murmured. She was so very sad and scared. After the Red Man came, Vial knew who the Red Man was. Rhaenys was just a child, but she could feel if not understand that her father's right hand, John Connington, whose hair were red, disliked her and thought her unworthy of her royal father. "All right, sweeterling," she murmured. "Can you tell me where is your brother?" she asked softly, caressing Rhaenys' dark curls. Rhaenys sniffed but nodded. "He is in the nursery," she said. "I left Balerion with him," she added. "He will protect him. A cat is not a dragon." Vial turned to Sir Roderick, but he was already directing his men who looked more like shadows, and most of the time she almost forgot they were there, in the shadows, to the nursery with the order of protecting the child and not let anyone enter unless it was by explicit order of herself or of the mother. "Very well, sweeterling," Vial murmured softly. "Why don't you show this gentleman the way to the nursery and look over your brother? I will care for your mother." Rhaenys looked back at the bed beyond which Vial could see the unmoving head of her good sister. "Go, sweeterling." Vial encouraged her and Rhaenys caressed her cheek and hopped off her lap. She then took Sir Roderick's coarse hand in his and guided her sworn sword away from there, as two of his men still stayed behind guarding the chamber for her. Quietly she made her way to her good sister, who had slid against the side of the mattress and down to the hard floor, her knees against her chest, her hair in disarray, her dark eyes glazed over and her hands laying slack to the floor. She wasn't looking at her. Vial softly knelt by her side. "Elia," she called her, but her good sister gave to sign she might have heard. She softly caressed her dark mane. A Sheridan was showed inside, and her sharp intake of breath as she saw her princess in that state made Vial's heart plummet in her belly. "Elia," she tried again, to no avail. Ashura fell to her knees at her princess' side, crying her as well, and caressing her face with such a tenderness that it broke Vial's heart. "Sister," she called softly, and at this her dark eyes did snap to her. Although the rest of her body felt way too stiff and unmoving. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Speak to me, I cannot help you otherwise." She sniffed and looked back to the wall. "I cannot be helped," she hoarsely called out, her eyes red and puffy but now dry. Vial exchanged a look with Ashura, and the lady started to try and coax her princess up and to the mattress at the very least. Meanwhile Vial stood up and looked around herself for any sign of what may have happened. The incriminating piece immediately brought her attention to it. It was a parchment laying face down upon the floor, bearing the personal sigil of her brother Rhaegar. Without uttering word, Vial walked to it and retrieved it from the floor, her eyes scanning it for the reason of her good sister's state. What she read on that parchment chilled her to her very bones. She let the parchment fall to the ground as if scorched by it and turned, her eyes alarmed, to her Northman. "Summon your fastest rider," she demanded as she started to search madly for a clean sheet of paper and some writing supplies. She started to throw in the words of warning for her family in the north, hoping her letter may reach them fast enough. "Please," she prayed, "let this reach them in time." She heated the red sealing wax and pressed her ring, on her index finger, into the warm wax, imposing to it the seal of House Stark. In a few moments that felt like eternity, she delivered her letter to their rider and sent him on his way, hoping he might reach them in time. Stupid, foolish girl, she thought as she looked at her destroyed good sister being coaxed into a new nightgown by her lady-in-waiting. "Please, please. Think of what you may cause." She looked at the parchment bearing her brother's seal and took it. Part of her wished to burn it to ashes to make sure no one read it. She knew her brother was not thoughtful enough to keep a second copy, but his right hand surely was, and she could not afford them to have a document they had not. She folded it. She would decide how to move after that. She turned just as her good sister screamed, "Let me be!" She yelled, "I cannot be helped." Vial marched to the bed and slapped her soundly on the cheek, the slap forcing her to stop trashing into her lady-in-waiting hold and look at her with big doe eyes, scared lifeless. "Are you calm now?" she hissed. "Are you really just going to roll over and die and let him take everything you fought so hard for, stealing your children's legacy from them?" she snapped. "What kind of mother are you?" Lady Ashura tried to intervene, but a glare from Vial shut her up. "I can do nothing," Elia snapped. "I am powerless." Vial clenched her jaw and called another of her men. "Find Prince Lewin of the King Saguard," she ordered, "and bring him here presently," she said. The man nodded and obeyed. Vial turned back to her good sister. "You are not a small child, you are a martel. Remember your words." "Unbowed, unbent, unbroken," she told her. "A princess of dawn," she said, "and the mother of the future king of the Iron Throne," she snapped. "A babe at your breast you have a duty to defend with nail and tooth." This seemed to bring a bit of perspective to Elia, because she looked at her looking more lucid than she had a moment before. "Who are you?" Vial asked. "Elia Martel." Vial nodded. "And do Martel just accept insults?" she demanded. "Do they just let people walk all over them?" The Martels had joined the Iron Throne at their own pace when they wanted, after having brought down a dragon and its rider from the skies. Nay, Elia's voice seemed stronger. "Good," she stated, "because we have work to do," she said, "namely building a crowd of supporters in the court to Rhaenys and Aegon's claim," she added, just as the Maester Sir Roderick had sent for came knocking at the chamber. Vial turned to him and studied his bony appearance, his soulful eyes. "You called for me, Lady Avalia?" he asked softly. Vial nodded and gestured for him to come inside. "I have need of you, Maester," she commented. "We have need of you," she added before turning to her good sister. She outstretched to him the parchment her brother had written and signed, signing with it the condemnation to war of a whole realm. He accepted the parchment and read it quietly. He looked back into her eyes. Vial nodded to him. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked. "If you mean a parchment signed by my brother, the heir to the Iron Throne," she stated, her voice cold and flat, "to set aside his royal wife and their children in favor of eloping with my good sister Lyanna of House Stark, aided by Winterfell's present Maester." It's exactly that." She looked back at Elia for a moment, then back at the Maester. "I don't need to tell you what kind of war may break if this comes to be." The Maester shook his head. "You don't, my lady." Vial nodded and took back the parchment he was handing back to her, folding it again swiftly. "I already sent my fastest rider to Riverrun," she stated. "My good brother, Ned Stark's betrothed, Lady Catelyn, resides there. She will make sure this message is conveyed to Winterfell," she added. "The North will be ready," she added. The Maester frowned. "What do you mean, my lady?" Vial sighed and took a steadying breath. "I mean," she said, "that my husband, Lord Brandon Stark, is already preparing the North in the eventuality of a war breaking," she explained. "But alas, they do not know that their Maester is a traitor," she added, "and he was preparing in the eventuality of them trying to keep me hostage beyond what anyone would call proper." She admitted not of his sister eloping with a prince and throwing the realm into chaos because of it. Elia was studying her. "You were already afraid of a war happening," she commented. Suddenly she sobbed in surprise. "You were the distraction," she realized, "to make sure the North had time to prepare should the need arise." Vial nodded, and she could see the admiration in her eyes and the wonder in the Maester's ones. "What do you need me to do, my lady?" the Maester asked. "I am nothing but a tutor," he added. Avalia took a deep breath. "Nay," she said, as of the time words reached them, she stated, "my husband will certainly execute Maester Wallers under charges of treason." She said, "Winterfell will need a new Maester," she added. "Would you feel up to the task?" The man looked up at her in wonder. You honor me, my lady," he added, bowing his head. Vial nodded. It was certainly a jump from unwanted tutor to Maester of the biggest keep of the North. She folded her hands before herself. "House Stark doesn't seek greatness in their men," she stated. "We favor loyalty," she said. "Are you loyal, Maester?" she asked, praying to be making the right decision. The Maester straightened his shoulders and let go of his neck chain he usually tugged at when uncomfortable, and straightened his back before bowing deeply to her. "I am, my lady." Avalia nodded. "Very well, Maester," she stated. "What do you suggest we do?" "I think we need to build a niche of supporters here for Prince Aegon and Princess Rhaenys," she said. "You know the coming and goings of this court better than me by now," she added. "Who can we trust beside Lewin Martell and Lady Ashura?" She didn't name her mother. It was crazy for her, and made her feel like a derelict daughter, yet she did not trust the Queen on this matter. Mere voice interrupted them, and Viel looked beyond the maester's shoulder to the emerald eyes of Jaime Lannister. "You can trust me," he stated. "I am with you," he claimed, and Viel nodded to him, trusting his earnest gaze as he came inside to her side. Next to him there was another figure, who stepped into the light, and Viel held her breath as her brother Baelor walked inside, nodding to her. "They are my nephew and niece," he stated. "I will defend them." Viel nodded, then asked about the men she had sent Jaime to stop from spreading word of her resistance to fire. "I have them detained with some Lannister men," he said. "Those men are fanatics," he added. "They kept blabbing about some prince that was promised and about you being a real dragon. Had to restrain them," he stated. Viel nodded. Another matter to preoccupy her. One matter at time, she told herself, one step at time. She looked around herself. She, her good sister, Lady Ashura Dane, her Northman, Jaime Lannister, and the Maester Lewin Martell certain to arrive soon, her brother Baelor. This was the first bud of the supporters of Princess Rhaenys and Prince Aegon. And, they were looking at her for guidance. Viel straightened her shoulders. "I am a Stark of Winterfell now," she thought. "I am the wife of the Protector of the North, the carrier of ice. I will ensure the line to the throne and return home to never be bothered again." She turned to the men in her company. "I will trust your word, Jaime," she stated. "Do not make me regret it," she added. She then looked in the clear eyes of the grey man and fingered the direwolf seal at her hand. "What do you think to be the best course of action, Maester Lewin?" she asked softly. A foreboding feeling left her breathless for a minute. "Winterfell is my home now, Brandon and my sons, the Starks my family. I will resolve this and return home. North, where the snows fall and the wolves howl. Ladies and gents, the beginning of the rebellion, who knows? Meanwhile, I give you the political faction in support of Rhaenys and Aegon. Named the Yellow Faction because of the colors of House Martell of Sunspear. Formed by Notes. Oh snap. And now what will happen? Additional infos in this post: https://regina.tumblr.com/6705449872068771844/updated-the-new-chapter-of-wind-of-ice. Or if you are interested. As always, tell me what you thought of this chapter. Sending all my love, G. Chapter 30, Lion of V. Summary. What sparks the rebellion, or not? Notes. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Lion of V. She took a deep breath and looked behind herself, stopping her mare just enough to get a breather. The winds were harsher in the north and she felt almost breathless, but most of it, she was sure, was due the fact that finally her new life would begin. Lyanna had always felt rejected from the north. She may have looked stark enough to be a compelling match for a lord and name did carry some power, especially after her brother had married Princess of Ilyar, but she had always wished for more. More that no one was willing to give her, or so she thought. She had almost resigned herself to her destiny, marrying the Baratheon lord and abandon forever her homeland, when Rhaegar had come around and had changed everything. She was deeply sorry for the hurt she knew would linger in her beloved family. She knew Benjen would understand, how could he not? And she knew that her mother, given time, would forgive her, and one day they would think back on his day and laugh about it, about her stubbornness and of how she had been right in her pursuit of her own happiness at her prince's side. Her lord father would be easily dissuaded. After all, he had welcomed with open arms Princess of Ilyar despite her Targaryen ancestry as a wife for his heir. How could he not accept that his daughter, willful as she was, had managed to snatch for herself an even better match? The future king of the Seven Kingdoms. He would forget about the match he had tried to make with Robert Baratheon straight on, she was sure. The only one who would be frustrated and angry with her would be Brandon, not Ned. Darling Ned would understand better than anyone else, she knew, as he was loyal and true, and he would suffer the most because of her act, because it could mean that his wife, the mother of his children whom he dearly loved, would be given as bride to somebody else, someone she truly loved. Brandon was twice as stubborn as she was. He would put the blame of it on her at first, instead than on their lord father and his wife. But with time, she was sure, and the cares of Lady Barbary, who would leave her husband in a heartbeat for Lyanna's brother, he would soon forget all about the Targaryen princess he had claimed for bride once upon a time. Everything would be fine, and Lyanna would one day be remembered as the warrior queen who had helped her princely husband to win the Iron Throne and restore the realm to peace and glory. She brought to a stop her mare and turned around, the northern pale landscape meeting her gaze. She had left Winterfell in the first hours of the day, when the keep was yet completely woken. She was sorry for such an abrupt departure, but she knew she would not have the strength to leave if she lingered, and knew her time would soon run short. She had taken one way and then covered her traces just enough to make it look like she had just taken a ride as she usually did. Maester Wallers would also convince her lord father and brother of the truth of this, telling them of how she had spoken fondly of going for a ride to see the dawn in these first days of spring. He would provide the cover needed until they understood she had no intention of ever returning, not until everything was done with. She knew one day they would forgive her, when she was queen consort of the 7 kingdoms, a wife and queen in more than just name. And happy, oh so very happy. After all, nothing worth being happy over, could be easily achieved. One had to risk, and Lyanna was ready to risk it all. Rhaegar wanted to make of her, her queen and wife. She was sorry for Princess Elia, truly, but Rhaegar wanted her, the wolf girl the North so easily rejected and refused. He wanted her, because she didn't want to remain relegated to the role the society wanted for her. Because she wanted to be more. She was sure they could find a way to make sure Elia and her children were well cared for. As a magnanimous queen and king they could grant them lordship and ladyship and titles and lands, and Princess Elia could remarry with someone of her station. Lyanna would make sure the match would grow to be one of love, like hers and Rhaegar. Everything would be all right. She was sure of it. She would make sure of it. Princess Lyanna almost jumped out of the saddle, but she didn't lose her balance upon the mare. She loved to ride. It was something she and Rhaegar would gladly engage in once they were finally together. She turned around, finding herself face to face with her contact. There you are, he called her. Rhaegar had told her he could not come and get her, but that his trusted man, Lord Connington, had sent her one of his men, a man who would treat her with the respect deserved of her new station as his wife-to-be. This man must be him. Yet just to make sure she held her chin up and observed him with her stormy grey eyes fixed intently upon his brow. Who are you? Name's Archibald, my lady, he told her, making a show of a bow from his own saddle. Lord John Connington has sent me forth to reach you and bring you to the prince, he added. Lyanna smiled. I told Rhaegar I would have drawn less attention alone, she said. I know the North like my pockets. You foreigners stand out like a sore thumb, she commented with an easy smile. The man did not seem offended by her jape. He merely bowed down. His Highness didn't want anything to happen to you. He offered no altercation. He wished you incurred in no problem, he added. Does your family know you've left? He asked. Lyanna shook her head. Nay, she said. Maester Wallers will cover the traces of my escape, she told him. He will gain us what time he can, she added. She had distrusted the Maester once upon a time, and even her good sister. Now she knew better. Her good sister was in love with her royal brother, the Prince Innis. Lyanna thought him an handsome fellow, though dull if compared to his oldest brother. She had been unable, not strong enough, to oppose the match her father had organized for her, and her brother Brandon had ended up in the middle of it. Yet she had given him 2 sons, and Lyanna was sure that one day, gods be good, they would all laugh about this. Brandon would find his true love with Barbary. She was sure the young lady would abandon her duty husband to be with her brother, Princess of Ilia, with Prince Innis, and Lyanna would see her children grow and be happy. Princes and princess with a real queen and wife for a mother, someone to whom their father listened to and appreciated. The North would not suffer insult or ill with a northern queen on the Iron Throne. The bannermen of the North would be loyal, and Lyanna would finally unite the kingdoms for real with her beloved husband and king at her side. She knew it possible. Benjen had dreamed of it, of a Stark queen for a Targaryen king atop the Iron Throne. He had seen it. Lyanna just had to have faith in his abilities as a green seer. She knew her time would run short. Thus was why, instead than taking the land by horse, they would sell the horses in a small village to have them continue their cross southward and then north again. The hooves of her horse was well recognizable in all the North, and they would follow it. While they would reach White Harbor on foot, a ship was already awaiting for them. They would take the seas and meet with Rhaegar again in Harrenhal, where he was awaiting for them. Lyanna was rude to separate from her mare, but sacrifices must be made for this future Rhaegar, and she had dreamed and were building. In White Harbor they had to be careful, because she was easily recognizable, which was the reason why they sold the horses before reaching it and steered well away from Newcastle, and Lyanna had to say with her head covered by a dark muddy worn-out cloak to go unnoticed. Thankfully the ship was ready to depart, so they moved about the harbor like ghosts, embarking and lifting the anchor as soon as Lyanna was successfully on the ship to leave the North behind. She felt some sort of sick foreboding chill run up her spine as she watched White Harbor become always smaller until it was but a speck. She had left Winterfell a good day before and she was sure that by now her ruse had been discovered and they were searching everywhere for her. "Mother, father, forgive me," she murmured, "but the world is ahead, and I mean to discover it together with my prince." When they docked in the Riverlands, half a moon turn had passed. She knew news of what was happening might have spread around the Seven Kingdoms. She only needed to reach her prince in Harrenhal, she was sure, and everything would be all right. What was half a moon turn of chaos for decades of prosperity? After all, they took a boat which followed the rivers to Harrenhal, and when finally they reached the great, imposing dark keep, Lyanna felt bone-tired. She couldn't await to be with her prince, her lord husband-to-be. She had never thought herself a romantic at heart, but Rhaegar had changed that. He had brought out of her the more sensible side, and she was so glad he had. His words had been so sweet and soft, and Lyanna had fallen more helplessly in love with him with each secret letter she received. "Have you sent word forward?" she asked of Sir Archibald. He was taciturn, and often Lyanna felt like a babe in the woods when he looked at her. "Lost, I am sure Rhaegar will be awaiting anxiously." "Of course I did, Princess," he stressed, as he rowed the boat that would take her to her prince. Lyanna disliked the way he treated her, yes, with respect, but with an edge of judgment to his tone. Like she was being respected only because higher power commanded of it, and not because she was worthy of respect because of everything she was sacrificing to be with her princely love and help him build a better world. Together. She would be sure to tell Rhaegar of it. Her beloved would explain to her what she was yet too young to understand, and she was sure he would speak with the man, and Lyanna would be surrounded only by people who respected her and loved her for whom she was and what she was doing. The Targaryen banner was hoisted up the walls next to the Went one. Lyanna started to feel giddy when she noticed that the gates were open and that the drawbridge was ready for them. She could recognize some of the people awaiting. The proud man with a hand to his blade at his side, a head full of red hair and a well-trimmed beard of the same color, dressed in black, was without any doubt Lord Jon Connington, Rhaegar prime advisor. Next to him Prince Innes, with a doublet of black and silver and his silver curls framing his face. He stood a couple of inches shorter than Rhaegar, standing in the middle of the welcoming party, wrapped in full regalia, with a fur-lined cloak of red velvet and a doublet and breeches of leather black. To his left was his queenly mother, the Queen Rhaella Targaryen, for the woman could be no one else. Beautiful as her prince, Rhaella stood tall, almost as tall as Rhaegar. Her silver gold hair were half pinned behind her head and falling into waves down her back. The cold light of winter made them look more of a dull golden than a shiny silver, but she looked in health and was clearly pregnant, her belly round with babe. Behind them stood 2 knights of the Kingsguard. That was something unexpected, Lyanna thought, but the moment her eyes met the purple ones of Rhaegar, everything else fell away. She was here finally. She was so excited to see him. He didn't even wait for the boat to have completely stopped. She didn't care about sullying and ruining her skirts. She just jumped out of the boat and her boots ended up ankle deep into the muddy waters, but she didn't care, even as her skirts soaked with it. She smiled brightly at her prince and Rhaegar smiled back at her, and everything was fine in the world as he stepped into her and drew her in his embrace, cupping her cheeks and kissing her lips before everyone to see. She was his chosen lady. Lyanna did feel her cheek flush, but she left herself bask in his presence. He was handsome as ever, but there were dark circles beneath his striking purple eyes and his hair were methodically brushed back from his face, combed almost obsessively behind. She liked him best when he was wild, when he looked wild. She smiled at him. "I am here," she murmured against his lips, feeling elated. He grabbed her tightly against his body and nodded against her. Then he let her go, turned around and hoisted her up from the riverbanks and onto the ground. He patted her hair in a semblance of order and looked hopefully at his family. He kissed her cheek lovingly before starting with he introductions. "My brother, the Prince Innes of House Targaryen," he introduced with a wave of his hand. "My royal mother, Queen Rhaella of House Targaryen." Lyanna knew her courtesies even if she distasted them. She curtsied to both of them. "Your Highness," she saluted, "Your Grace." Prince Innes' smile was forthcoming and bright as his brother's welcome. "Sister," he was clearly pleased by her presence, and when Rhaegar leaned closer to her ear to whisper to her, "Now that you are here, he hopes that his wedding with Vielle would happen soon." She smiled softly, though the mention of her good sister left a sour taste in her mouth. She despaired the hurt that would cause her brother, for however shortly. "You already know Jon Connington." The lord in question nodded his head at her. His eyes were cold and reprimanding, Lyanna thought, but it was no matter, as long as she had Roriger love, she had it all. My lord, she saluted. Lady Lyanna did not miss the fact that he had used her title of lady, but without adding Stark. She was Roriger intended, no matter what Robert, her father and the whole of the continent said, she ought to be addressed as such, but she merely smiled at him. She didn't know from whence this dislike for her came, but John Connington seemed to be always in contrast with Roriger's spouse. She had noted it even during the tourney. The coldness he had reserved for Princess Elia. Lyanna would simply show him she was no princess who could not stand up for herself. My two sworn shields, Roriger waved for the two Kingsguard to come forth. They've deserted the Kingsguard of my father to become the first two of mine, he told her. Sir Arthur Dane and Sir Gerald Hightower he introduced to her. They both saluted her with nods, and Lyanna nodded to them as well, her head bowing down just enough. He then looked at them all. Mother, brother and friends, he said, the Lady Lyanna of House Stark, my lover. Lyanna smiled softly at all them, hoping to make the best of impressions. She tried to recall the way Evalia had conducted herself when she had come to Winterfell, but she despaired in noticing that she had lacked the forepractice of asking in advance about the people she was to meet. I am very pleased of meeting you all, she settled to, and your grace, congratulations on your pregnancy. Had I been aware I would have brought a good luck charm for the babe from the north with me, she offered. The woman stiffened, and instead of looking on her with sweetness as her mother had to her good sister, she scrunched her face in a grimace. So, she said, looking at Roriger, this is what you left wife and children for, she asked, her face expressionless as she half twisted around. She looked Lyanna up and down, then added, another child. Her expression was filled with disdain. Lyanna couldn't say if directed at her or her son. I hope she's worth it, she added. She gave her another one down, looking her from the top of her mess of dark hair to her muddy skirts. She better be worth of it, she seethed as the winds of winter picked up and coldly howled in their ears. Roriger stiffened at his side. Lyanna had to bite her lip to avoid crying. I assure you, your grace, she replied, I love your son, she said, and I will do my best to support him. Queen Rolla raised her chin and gave her a non-impressed glare. I would despair otherwise, Lady Lyanna, she pointed out. You better prove your loyalty soon, or the realm will be thrown in civil war. She cupped her round belly and walked away from them. Lyanna rose her glance to look at Roriger, and he offered her a tense smile. She will accept you in time, he promised her. Both I and her are fond of Elia, and she's pregnant, not her most lucid moment. Give it time. Lyanna forced the lump down her throat and nodded. Of course. I understand. She did not. She missed her mother, surely she would have known what to do. Then again she remembered that Vielle had reached the north alone save for a lady-in-waiting, and she had managed to enchant the whole of the Stark household. Lyanna could do the same with the Targaryen household. Her condition was a bit more precarious than Vielle's had been, but she could make do. Roriger loved her, and that was bound to open some doors for her. She was his betrothed and future wife and queen, after all. So, she murmured softly as Roriger escorted her away from the banks, when will the wedding take place? The only item she had brought with herself, barred the clothes on her back, was her maiden cloak. She was still putting the finishing touches on it, but it would soon be ready to be worn. Roriger paled and stiffened as he walked her back inside Harrenhal. He had already introduced her again to Lord and Lady Went and their beautiful daughter, for whom the tourney had been organized, to celebrate her name-a-day. About that, Roriger murmured, we have encountered some obstacles, he told her, and Lyanna blinked. What obstacles? It looks like the decree formally annulling my marriage to Elia went destroyed. Lyanna stopped mid-stride. Roriger grabbed her by the arm. Not here, Lyanna, he reprimanded, tugging at her arm to have her follow him. What do you mean it went destroyed? She demanded. I thought you had written it was a done deal, she said. She bore the woman and her children no ill will, but Lyanna had left her whole home and world behind, knowing there was a marriage awaiting for her. Not to become a mistress. She let him tug her into a secluded corner, and Roriger pressed a fervent kiss to her lips. It's only a matter of time, my wolf, he promised her. Elia must be behaving willfully, without doubts provoked also by her Dornish kin. Of course. It had been foolish of her to hope that Prince Elia Martell would just bend down and accept that she was being set aside and her children were made bastards of. She couldn't know Roriger meant to legitimize them as Martells. They had wait until he was king for him to be able to do that, and Roriger had told her that Elia bore him love. Does she have grounds to oppose the annulment? Lyanna demanded, feeling the fury rise in her blood. Roriger's eyes sparkled purple, menacing. Do not take that tone with me, Lionel, he seethed. I had no idea she would prove difficult, he added. If I tell you it's only a matter of time, that will be, and you better accept it. Lionel was astounded by the change in his demeanor. Roriger had told her to never tempt his fury, for he was the blood of the dragon, and a woken dragon had melted the turrets under which they were living when spurned. His fury would be unrelenting. But what of hers, what of her wolf blood, which demanded answers to her queries? How long will she continue to prove difficult, she demanded, instead, baring her teeth like a wolf against an enemy. Wolf and dragon stared at each other, hissing and growling at each other. Her dream was shattering already. She had come here to become a wife, not a mistress. Even if she proves to be difficult to no end, Roriger told her, I've already notified the High Septon, he added. He will bind you to me. Even if she never bends, I'll make her, he promised her. You will be my wife in truth. I'll take you as well, but I'd rather not to have her still for a wife when I am crowned, or the Dornish will never accept me, putting Egon aside for a child born of our union, he stated calmly. So, you'll still marry me? She hated how much like a little girl she sounded, but she needed to know. Roriger's fury seemed to abate at that, and he caressed her cheek. Of course, he nodded. Only, let's give her some time. I will try and smooth things over, try to talk her out of her stubbornness. If it fails, he added, I will marry you anyway and name you chief consort. See how she takes that insult, he added darkly. After all, Egon the dragon had 2 wives yet loved only one. Yet Maegor had taken the Iron Throne when it belonged rightfully to his brother's son. Was this the fate that awaited her children, she wondered, forever guarding their back from the children of Elia Martell, afraid that they will be stabbed in the back at the first opportunity for the Iron Throne? Believe me, my wolf, he added, pressing himself against her and kissing her brow lovingly, this setback sends my blood boiling as well, but we must move carefully. We cannot spurn a civil war. We have to win the throne with few, well-placed battles and the right political support. I am sorry, I must ask patience of you, as I demand it of me. Lionel nodded slowly. He kissed her lips again. I love you, my wolf, he told her. The world we will build will be something never done before. Something great, and they'll say it started today. With your arrival to Harrenhal. Lionel nodded and kissed his lips. What of my family? She asked, have you reached out to them? He bit his lip. I have, he said. Maester Wallace has written to me that everything is all right. House Stark will stand behind us. Lionel's smile could have lit 1,000 suns. Perfect, she murmured. And what of House Lannister? She asked. You had written to me. You meant to speak with Lord Tywine. Are they with us? Roriger frowned. No, he replied. Cersei Lannister has been promised to Viserys, who my father intends to name heir to the Iron Throne. They will be against us. Lionel pursed her lips. All right, she murmured. We knew it'd be difficult, she mumbled. Gods be good, we'll reap the fruit of our sacrifices and difficulties. Roriger smiled at her and kissed her lips once again. Maybe her dream was not yet reached, but Lionel was on course for it. She knew. The Silver Faction. In the notes below I have added the link to the post in which I explain in better detail the Silver Faction. Notes. So, I'm actually trying to recreate the dynamic Henry Tudor / Anne Boleyn with this, and those around them. Just because they support Roriger doesn't mean they support Lionel or her place in his retinue and life. Also, notice how he introduces her as lover instead of betrothed. Does he love her? Is he manipulating her? Is it both? Wolf blood and dragon blood mashing together doesn't look very cute from my perspective. I hope I have managed to convey well enough that Lionel is half an immature girl enamored and manipulated, half she tries to make big dreams for herself become reality. Like being regarded as more than just a wife and a queen, but a companion and an advisor to Roriger, who helped him build this new world that he has put in her head. And I certainly hope Roriger's obsession with this new world he intends to build, this greatness he dreams for himself and his son the prince that was promised, is not healthy. Also, does he really mean to put aside the children as well, or is it only a consequence he means to work around once he has his child from Lionel? To this link https://regina-ruby.tumblr.com/67418912371479472/next-chapter-of-wind-of-soon-to-be- updated will send you straight to the additional content about this story, the new faction. Last time we checked in the Yellow faction, it is time for the Silver faction. Hope you enjoyed. As always, sending all my love. G. Chapter 31, Vial 11 and Brandon 8. Summary. KL and Winterfell. Notes. So yeah, inspiration stuck again on this, so I wrote this 2-pof chapter in like 2 hours. Hope you enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Avalia 12. Avalia watched behind her shoulder as she and Jaime walked through the corridor's semi-desert to reach the secret passageways that would lead them to the dungeons. When she nodded to Jaime the all-clear, he took the torch from its hanger and tugged down its twin to open up the secret passageway to the dungeons. The 2 men behind them followed inside. They were Dornishmen that Prince Luin Martell had granted them as protector of sorts. The stair leading down were narrow, with bending walls that seemed to cave over those who walked down the steps, making them bend themselves. Her tiny stature let her walk almost completely straight, while Jaime needed to curve to precede her inside the narrow passageway, the torch held in the only way to avoid the cold gusts of wind coming from the dungeons to extinguish it. Sir Roderick was in the city with Maester Lewin, building the support of the small folk. She felt his absence keenly, but less than she would have without Jaime at her side. She had come to rely much on her northern protector. Be careful, he told her. The steps are a bit wobbly, he explained, turning around what he needed to offer her his hand. Vial took it and let him guide her down the steps she could barely see even with the light of his torch lightening the way ahead. The passageway hit a very narrow point in which both Jaime and Vial had to crunch and pass through sideways to then reach a couple of last, very wobbly steps that led them finally to the dungeons. But when the light of the torch lit the under-earth corridor, Vial felt a sob tearing at her throat in surprise. The walls were filled with shelves on both sides. The shelves were of wood and filled with bowls and stills of all sizes and shapes. Inside the glasses she could see clearly the unstable, green liquid that she had learned since a child to fear. Wildfire. Liters upon liters of blaze, unstable and gleaming emerald, littered also the pathway on the stone ground. She found herself growing closer to Jaime, their expressions both horrified and scared as they shared a look as Vial hung on his arm. Jaime, for the love of the gods, she pleaded, tell me this is not what I think it is. Her knight sighed and looked down to his face. His emerald eyes gleamed in the torchlight, made even more green by the light of the wildfire crowned all around them. He waved a torch a bit to get a better look, and they could see the shelves rose up until the ceiling of the dungeons, just below the stone floor of the upper corridors. Be careful with that, she exclaimed when he moved the torch again, way too quick for her liking when they were literally surrounded, ceiling and shelves and floor, by wildfire. What kind of man could condone such a madness? Avalia whispered, horrified, as she watched the lines of wildfire shelves continue along the sides of the whole dungeons. They shared another look, knowing most possibly that his father must have had a hand in helping Aes, because this couldn't be the work of a couple of months. It looked more like the work of a couple of decades, or at least of the years past since her father had started to become unhinged. The 2 Dornishmen were speaking between themselves. We need to resolve this matter, Avalia demanded. Now, she added. But what of? Jaime asked. Avalia shook her head. Baylor will manage to keep them occupied long enough for us to have a chat with the Grand Master, she commented, holding her skirts so that they did not trudge on the floor with the possibility of tug at the stills and blows that littered the corridor's floor. She saw determination filling Jaime's eyes as he nodded to her and started to make way through the dungeons and to the Guild of Alchemists' rooms, which happened to be on the other side of the pathway, signaled by 2 lit torches ablaze with green fire on a wooden signboard. Let me go in first, Avalia commented. Jaime shook his head. I am not letting you put yourself in harm's way, he opposed, and Avalia smiled at him. Of being back in King's Landing, having Jaime and his loyalty at her back was one of the best. He may not always have done the right thing, but he was trying to do it right by them this time around. And I am not putting myself in harm's way, she added. I promised Brandon that I would do all I had to do to survive and return home, safe and sound, to him and the children. And I will do it, she stressed. You really love your husband, don't you? Jaime inquired. Vial felt her face relax in a smile, and she almost could feel Brandon's touch upon her face, upon her lips, his arms wrapping around her waist as he towered around her, keeping her warm and safe. The memory of the last time they had shared the heat of their love in that bed in Harrenhal before everything went askance. I do, she said, and Jaime clenched his jaw and nodded. I am happy for you, he said. I always only wished you'd find happiness and love. And I did, she assured him. Now I must do whatever it takes to protect that happiness and love, she said. Jaime nodded. Vial knew he loved his sister, Circe, the way Brandon and her loved each other. She also knew that Circe had been the one to convince him to take the white so that he could always be near her once she got married to one of Vial's brothers. She had always been completely sure of Jaime's feelings for Circe. She knew the sad lady too little to be sure about her feelings in regards of Jaime. But she truly hoped that the girl did not only wish to possess him so that no other would in her place. She looked at the two Dornish behind them. Whatever you hear inside this place, she stated, know that it is not the truth and that I speak only to gather intel and find a way out of this. They nodded at her, signaling they had understood, and Vial sighed. Jaime knocked on the door with such a sheer force that Avalia almost felt sorry for the poor door. Who dares disturb the work of the great alchemists? Demanded a voice that sounded half-possessed, half-confident as steps grew closer to the door. Her ladyship, Avalia Stark, Jaime called. The door opened immediately, almost with a bang, and both she and Jaime were hit full force by the emerald light of the wildfire blazes being cooked inside the narrow, dusty chamber. The man before her was hideous to look at, little and half-curved, with a receding hairline barely concealed by his leather bonnet. His clothes were all of leather, and there was the acrid smell of the dye they used on their clothes to make them as little flammable as possible. What a great honor, Your Highness, the man crooned, his hands, covered in burns, twisting before himself in a continuous manner. It has been since the times of Queen Rhaenyra that a princess of House Targaryen has graced us with her presence. Please be welcome, he cooed, making her way to enter. Great Master Rossart will be with you shortly. Avalia nodded. Thank you, she offered gently albeit stiffly. How these men could work such a devious weapon to use against the masses she could not say. The man bowed, and Avalia noticed that almost all the men working with wildfire, wearing gloves or none, with dark lenses balanced on the nose to cover the eyes, were either very young and thus short, or very short, or bended in forward. Your Highness, she twisted to a side and noticed how the laboratory of wildfire curved and continued until I could see and beyond in the bowels of the dungeons. The man speaking to her was taller than the rest. He wore the same clothes as the others though, and the same leathery bonnet upon his almost bald head. He sported a very well-trimmed beard, combed and oiled too. Such a pleasure to see such an esteemed member of House Targaryen visiting us again. He greeted her. It has been many years since a Targaryen princess has graced us with her presence. We bow down to the dragons, he added ceremonially, leaning forward in a bow. Avalia did not correct him in his statement of her ancestry, wanting to lull him in a sense of false safety until she could learn better how to control him to have the wildfire removed. She could not claim to come from her father. Most surely he would go to the king and discover her ruse, but she could claim something different. Well met, Grand Master Rossart, she greeted. I can see you are all hard at work today. He smiled. The work of a great pyromancer never ends, just like the work of the king, he added, nodding to her. What can I help you with? He asked. Have you come to control the quality of our work? I assure you, Your Highness, that we are working night and day to meet the demands of your most noble and esteemed father, the king. Avalia looked around herself. I can see this, she nodded reluctantly, but I don't come from my father, she stated. I come from my brother. She purposefully avoided mentioning which one. As the pyromancer led them to his study, Vial took the time to look around herself. The study was bare of wildfire, thankfully. The walls were bare and it had a Spartan outlook, with a table and a chair. Several candles and torches hanging to the walls. Your brother, Your Highness? He asked. Prince Viserys has visited us only the day past. What else does he need with us? Vial could not claim having come by Viserys' demand either, especially if he visited the pyromancer so oft, probably to control how well they were working for their father. She could not claim Baelor either, since her brother had more than once tried to have the pyromancers sent from King's Landing and their wildfire destructed, as it was against nature and the law of both men and gods alike, and he believed in his duty to rid the world of it by decree of the father. Rhaegar was another tricky subject, but everyone knew she and Daenerys had been very close growing up. I come not from my brother Viserys either, she told him, her tone conspiratorial. I come from my brother, the Prince Daenerys. The man blinked and frowned. Unsure. Prince Daenerys, he asked. He never showed any interest before. Vial had to think, and fast. My mother has developed a fear of wildfire since my kingly father has started to use it for the executions, she stated. In his wishes not to cause her concern, she lied. Oh, I suppose that makes sense, Rossart commented. After all, the little dragon is very attached to his mother's skirts yet. Vial pursed her lips. My brother is a man grown, she defended, and there is nothing wrong with wanting to avoid concern and stress upon a pregnant woman, wouldn't you say? Of course he bowed. I bow to your superior knowledge in these matters, your highness. What can I do for you? You can start by telling me how your work proceeds, she stated. My brother is very interested on replicating this process to other strongholds to keep in stalemate the warmonger lords and ladies. She lied. At the mention of more work for them the pyromancer's eyes gleamed with satisfaction and hope, especially after what happened to our father. We'd like to avoid the lords might feel arrogant enough to try something like that again. Of course he nodded. It was a scandal. A lord keeping prisoner his king in such a way until he met their demands. He shook his head. We would have liked to bring justice upon the oathbreaker ourselves, but the Lord hand was against such an act. So Tywin had most probably not been aware of the stashes of wildfire being prepared and put under the city. You and Prince Innes are most commendable for your filial love toward your most noble and esteemed father. Have you spoken to him about it? Not yet, she said. We wished to first inquire with you the possibility of doing it, before bringing to him the news. She was grateful for Jaime's silent presence behind her, because the pyromancer was speaking freely even if her bodyguard was stiffening more and more at each word they spoke. Yet Avalia needed to understand the extremes at which these people would go. Well, of which strongholds are we talking about? Harrenhal, she blinked. Casterly Rock. She felt Jaime stiffen even more behind her and she prayed he would keep his cool. Maybe even Sunspear and Winterfell, Riverrun. They are many and very big and old, the Grand Master mulled over. I would need schematics to tell you if it is possible. I can already say we can make do with Casterly Rock, he said, looking at Jaime with satisfaction and dark awe in his eyes. The golden caves beneath the rock would prove indispensable for our work. I cannot say for Sunspear and Winterfell. Both Dornish and Northerners are jealous of their own privacy. They tell us nothing. The man seemed to not remember that Vial was now a Stark of Winterfell as well. She let him go on, ignoring that. Of course she nodded, and the pyromancer tugged at the sides of his bonnet hanging near his face, deep in thought. Surely, he commented, the north would be the most difficult to reach unless your highness helped us, he said, pointing out thus that he had seen through her ruse. But why would the new Lady Stark wish such a fate upon her new family? Damn it. Jaime unsheathed his sword with a hiss, fully ready to attack if needed to. Avalia nodded to him, and in a moment he had the man held against the wall of his study with the blade at his throat. I'll be very clear, Grand Master Rossart, she said, walking to his chair and sitting on it. My name is Avalia Stark now, and on my honor as a Stark I promise you, I will find a way to dismantle your most precious guild and send you all scattering to the four edges of the world if it is what it takes for me to return home knowing that this is forever expunged from the face of the realm. I will do whatever it takes to make sure my sons live and thrive. Whatever it takes, she stressed. You can do nothing to me, he snapped. Your father named me Lord and gave me a place on his council, he declared. I am protected by his will. You can do nothing. Avalia passed a palm over one of the flames of a candle and shrugged. I am sure he will survive and replace you, maybe with someone I can better bribe and control. To make sure the wildfire is safely destructed and thus can no longer harm the civilians, she added. His eyes grew big. No pyromancer worth his belt, he said, tugging at his own belt of vibrant green, would bow down to such a demand. So Vial decided to take the chance and stood up. Quietly she reached Jaime and the pyromancer and smiled. But as you, yourself have stated, she commented, you bow down to the dragons. There are no more dragons, he snapped. House Targaryen lives only thanks to the wildfire we create for it. Vial smiled and reached out with a hand to the torch, letting her hand be engulfed by the flame. Fire cannot kill a dragon, she pointed out, retracting her hand from the flame unhurt and unburned. The man's eyes grew twice over now. Vial commented, will you do as I bid you to, or do I need to remove you, she demanded. Most of the pyromancer followed the red god of Ashai, a cruel, proud lord of light who demanded the burning of infidels and their false gods and blood sacrifices in name of his will. Dragons were those people's greatest dream and nightmare all wrapped together. I won't stand for this madness, he snapped, though I take orders only by your father the king. He then started to laugh. You will not harm me, he exclaimed. You are way too gentle to do such a thing, you don't have the guts to do it. You're right, she said, smoothing her skirts over. I don't, she stated, but I have the guts to have you apprehended and exiled from this city, she added, nodding toward Jaime. And you just threatened his family and his loved ones. He would be more than happy to actually kill you were I to demand it of him. So, will you comply or do I have to remove you, she asked again. I am not my father, and you aren't yours, the words came back to haunt her. Go fuck yourself, your highness was his coarse, crude reply. Exile it is, she decided. She then turned and nodded to the two Dornishmen that had followed them inside at a more sedated pace and were now behind them. Apprehend him and have him put on a boat, she said. If you ever return to King's Landing I'll have you killed. As she heard the noise of the man trying to overpower the two Dornishmen, Avalia closed her eyes, her hands forcefully clasped together so tight that her knuckles turned completely white. I am a mother, defending her sons. She reminded herself, what would happen, how much would it take for her father, or God's forbid Viserys, to actually try and put wildfire threat over the whole of the realm the way Aegon and his sisters had done with Dragonfire? She could not risk it. There has been a change in charge here, Jaime told the pyromancer, who were looking at them as the two Dornishmen preceded them out of the chambers and away to comply with her orders. Your Grand Master has been relieved of the office, he added. Now you take orders from Princess Avalia and no one else, or I will kill every and each one of you. Was I clear enough? He snapped, and Vielle felt almost revolted at the way the men fell in line nodding. Chin up, she told herself, back straight. You're the mother of wolves. Have all the shelves dismantled, she decreed. You will stop producing the wildfire and instead find a way to destroy the most of it safely away from the civilians. It should have surprised how easily they complied, but maybe not every one of them was as possessed by ambition and madness as the Grand Master had been. They left the place behind as the pyromancer started to clean and tidy the laboratory and to put safely the wildfire away. She sighed. Let's go, she stated. We've got still people to meet, she added, trying to banish from her mind the noise of the blade hissing against the flesh of the Grand Master Jaime had killed on her order. The tip-tap coming from above them, the shelves dancing on their hinges as people walked above them, reminded her of how many lives would have been lost if she hadn't acted. Gentle mother, she prayed, font of mercy. Have mercy on my soul. Baelor was already waiting for them, with him young Lord Mace Tyrell, wrapped into a worn-out cloak with a rose brooch keeping it in place. Where were you? Baelor demanded. I was starting to worry. We had a matter to close, Vielle replied. Something that you should know, she said, looking at both her brother and the young lord, something very discouraging and terrifying. What are you talking about, sister? Vielle sighed. Do you remember the head pyromancer? Our father made a lord of him and granted him a place on his council. Baelor nodded and made a grimace. Well, Jaime commented. He has been removed from his office, he stated. Baelor looked at her with surprise written on his face. Avalia shouldered on. I am not my father and you are not yours. I have had him exiled, she stated, and now we've taken charge of the pyromancer, for however brief we can keep them in line, she added. What happened? Lord Mace Tyrell demanded, his voice throaty, and Vielle looked at him for a long while. Lord Tyrell, she greeted, I am sorry for my tardiness, but I am justified as I have just discovered something incredibly upsetting. She turned to Jaime and nodded. Jaime rose his torch in the air and Vielle pointed up, coming from the other side, which looked still bare. Her brother and their guest had not noticed yet, but when the torch flame lit the walls, shedding light to the rows upon rows of stills and bowls of wildfire, she could see the horror being painted on their faces. When they finally looked back at her, Avalia looked at the lord before her and stated, I am a Stark of Winterfell now, my lord, she said. I am not blind to my father's faults, but this is too much. He is planning on having the whole city mined with wildfire, she added. She couldn't be sure, but by the quantity of wildfire she had seen being stored and prepared, she could only guess. We cannot let that stand. Your brother, Rhaegar, already reached out to us, Mace told us he wanted our support to dethrone Aes. We intended to stay neutral. Vielle nodded. I understand, she said. By what I understand, my lord, you already have several children, she stated. 3, he said proudly. 3 boys. Vielle nodded. I have 2, she said. 2 sons, she added. Of course you understand my plight. How can we trust my father upon the throne now that it is clear he has become unfit to rule? What you suggest is treason, he said, yet his tone did not conceal his interest in the matter. Only if we lose, Jaime commented, and Vielle nodded. Is it treason to defend our children and the realm from death and madness, she asked. Mace Tyrell arched a brow. And what of your brother? Word has he has set aside his lawful wife and children, he added, for a girl of the north, the she-wolf, wasn't it? Lyanna Stark, your own good sister. Damn it, Lyanna. Since her mother and Inez had made a dash for it in the middle of the night, leaving her and Elia to their fates, well, Inez did try to make her come with him, but he was sent away from Sir Roderick. She had been completely held hostage in Maegor's holdfast, and what few news she received were always colored by what her father wanted her to know. She had hoped her letter might reach them in time. It looked like it hadn't, to her greatest dismay. Which meant they did not know that Lyanna had planned to leave, had indeed left, and that she had done so of her own free will. "Word is wrong," she stated slowly. "My brother may have chosen my good sister, Lyanna Stark, as a lover," she said, disliking the idea of monoclearing Lyanna, a child still, as a mistress, but he has not set aside his wife and lawful children. He has no grounds to do either, and Aegon is his heir and future of House Targaryen. Mace Tyrell studied her. "You want me to throw my support behind Princess Elia and her children then?" She nodded. "She is the future queen consort of the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, as Rhaegar, her husband, and the father of her children, is the crown prince, the heir to the Iron Throne." "And what of your brother Viserys?" he asked. "We all know that he has his sights set on the Iron Throne, and that your father is just waiting for the chance to disown Prince Rhaegar and instate him as crown prince." "Yet, he cannot," she stated. "Rhaegar is the oldest and he already has an heir. Viserys is the second born and he doesn't have heirs to his name. Then again, do you really think the Dornish will just accept their kin being passed over for Viserys and his eventual children?" she asked. "It does look unlikely," he nodded, "but the king may not care. Our father," Baelor commented, "is of no mind to be taken seriously about this matters. We should have dethroned him years ago," he stated, "but Rhaegar wanted to await until he had a son to his name, to make his rule more stable with all the stillborns him and Elia had." Mace looked thoughtfully down. "You understand, this is a matter I must think over, because it is not that easy to choose to put myself and my sons in harm's way this way." Viel nodded. "I understand," she said. "I have 2 sons at home myself. But we cannot let this stand," she added. "What will be of our children when my father, or gods forbid Viserys, manage to use such a quantity of wildfire against us all?" she asked. For how scary the presence of the wildfire was, Viel was thankful she had discovered it now, because it meant that she could use it to convince people to throw their support behind Elia and her children, thus behind Rhaegar, who was moving for the throne evidently, instead of behind Viserys and their father. He nodded. "Aeleri is pregnant again," he stated. "If the babe proves to be a girl," he said, "we could, maybe, broach the subject of a marriage alliance," he commented. Viel stiffened. Her children were still infants, yet she and Elia were already planning on having them marry. There will be other children yet, but shouldn't at least one of the sons have a northern bride, she wondered. "I cannot decide without my husband," she stated. "This goes without saying," she added, "but of course, if your next babe happens to be a girl, or our next a girl, we can speak of it." After all, she thought, it's useless to put the cart before the horses. Mace nodded. "Very well," he stated, "I will consider this most thoroughly," he said. "Thank you for shedding light to the truth of this situation, my lady. Know this. Was I even to never take a stance," he added, "you will always have in House Tyrell of Highgarden a friend and ally. This is most I can hope for now," she thought dimly. She nodded. Brandon 8. He read and reread the Raven he received that very morning from Riverrun. It was written by his brother, Ned, who was still in Riverrun to spend some time with his future wife and her family. "Brother, there is peril ahead. Received word from Viel. Prince Rhaegar attempted to set aside Elia and her children. He means to take Lyanna for his. Guard our sister, do not let her do anything foolhardy. Ned." He scrunched the roll into his hand, the paper giving in to the power of his hold, and he raged. His father and his lady mother were both observing him with concerned and preoccupied expression. Everyone had been on edge since Lyanna had disappeared, assumingly she had gone on a ride, as she so often did, and as she had told Maester Wallers would. How the letter had reached Riverrun, by passing through Harrenhal on its way north, Brandon could not say. He just knew his brother must have read it and sent to him a swift resume of it. A part of him was angry at Viel, because she had written to Ned instead of him, but he also understood that, taken by the urgency of the moment, she might have thought of the most swift manner to have word reach them. Perhaps she was much more controlled than she let him think she was, since she seemingly could not risk sending a raven from King's Landing to Winterfell. Concern for his sister bled through his concern for his wife as Osric started to fuss in his arms. His mother was balancing Conlead in her arms, rocking him gently in her hold. Both children were now almost a year old, their name-a-day soon approaching, and Vial was not here to celebrate with them. Part of him wanted to hold this over her, be mad at her, but he knew she was doing what she felt right to make sure Osric and Conlead saw many more name-a-days in happiness. Yet, what really angered him was Lionel. Vial had told him of how she suspected that Lionel and Roriger might have stricken an unlikely romance during their time in Harrenhal, but Brandon had been sure that it was nothing more than a dalliance for the Dragon Prince and that Lionel would soon grow out of it once they returned to Winterfell and she was back home. Oh, how wrong he had been. No matter what, he could not think that Lionel would actually leave behind her whole family for the Dragon Prince, thus for sure she had been either manipulated or abducted, for there was no other possibility. He looked at Sir Selhino, dark-skinned and with eyes dark as smoking amethysts, his glare so potent the world would have bent to his will in that moment. But not Brandon. "Tell me the truth of it, brother," he demanded. "Could your brother, Prince Roriger, abducted my sister to his leisure?" Selhino grimaced. "I never did strike a good kinship with Roriger," he stated. "He always saw me as a threat to his rightful place, especially after Aerys named me a Black Fear publicly," he added. "This is not what I asked," Brandon demanded, his father made to open his mouth, yet in that moment the glare Brandon sent his way was enough to have him keep his mouth shut. While Ricard might still be his father, Brandon was the wielder of ice. Through their old ways Brandon was the protector of the North, chosen by North itself. He was the one on whom dwarfs and giants, shamans and skin changers relied. He was the one to whose call they had answered. He knew they would follow him to war, if needed be. His father knew as well. Selhino pursed his lips in an expression so similar to Vial that Brandon felt his heart ache and twist in his chest. His wife, tiny and gentle, surrounded by enemies in an hostile court, left to fend for herself save for those few he had managed to send after her to protect her. Word had reached him of how Aerys had tried to dispatch of Roderick and of how his wife had outsmarted her father in open court and managed to keep him close. That made him feel even worse. His wife was supposed to be home, and him to the front lines. Not the other way around. His sons should know and remember their mother's voice as well as they recognized their father's by now. And it killed him especially when Conlead's first word, butchered as it was, had been "Mama," but not in regard to his mother, said looking at his grandmother, the Lady Lyra. The child could not know the truth of it, and Lyra had tried to lessen the blow on him by stating that everything would be alright and that the children would know their mother well, yet it had hit Brandon worse than when he had to restrain Charlotte against Selhino. It killed him that Vial had lost that precious moment, that she had lost Osric's first tumbling attempts to walk or crawl. And now Lionel was being abducted and taken by the Dragon Prince, and Brandon could not just stay and wait. If word was true, Queen Rolla, on the guise of helping whom Aerys had forcefully forced Vial to remain to King's Landing, had stolen into the night with her son Innis and was with Roriger in Harrenhal holding court in her son's stead. Which meant that Vial was virtually alone. And he knew his wife. She would try and help her niece and nephew, the Prince Aegon and the Princess Rhaenys. In that attempt she could draw too much attention to herself. He sincerely hoped that his wife would demand to be let return to her husband, now that her queenly mother was no longer in any state to be helped by her. But he doubted Aerys would actually send her back to him. He would keep her as an hostage, which created upon House Stark a peculiar situation. Roriger held Lyanna, Aerys held Avilia. Which woman could they hope to save? No, he stated, Roriger is very noble, but... Everything before the word "but" is horseshit. He snapped at his good brother, eliciting a scandalized sob from his mother and a sigh from his father, who had been the first to teach him as such. "Did Roriger or not take my sister hostage? Is he able to do it?" Selhino clenched his jaw and fists on the table. He admitted at last, but not in the way you might think, he hastened to add. Brandon scrunched his face in a grimace. "Which other way is there?" he demanded, and Selhino made a face, surprised by the degree of fury he could hear in his voice. "If Vial thinks Roriger might have seduced Lyanna," he started. "Lyanna is young, unexperienced and idealist," he said. "She dreamed of many things. If you know what a person wants, you know how to manipulate her," he added. "And my brother, for all of his nobility, he is a prince. We've all learned how to get what we wanted from the people around us living at court." Brandon huffed out and threw his arms around his lady mother side, and he could see her lip was slightly trembling. "I refuse to believe that my daughter," his lord father said determinedly, "my prized daughter would elope with a married man." He might have promised her he would set Elia and the children aside to marry her. Shall he know dissected logically in the Raven Lord Eddard sent it says that he did try it. Brandon felt himself deflate, Osric looking up at him with his eyes grey-blue, so dark they almost looked purple, his pouty mouth almost gaping open. Could his sister had done it? He wanted not to believe it, but if Roriga had been able to convince her what she was doing meant she could be free. She was willful as she was beautiful, this sister of his. He could not believe it. His mother let out a shaky breath. My daughter, does she love him? She asked, and Brandon shook his head. I cannot say, he admitted, as he adjusted Osric in his grip. He had the next words on the tip of his tongue. Vielle thinks she might, he almost told her. They all turned and found themselves face to face with Benjen. I am sorry, I thought she would be happy, he added, his gaze falling down to his feet. Lyanna does indeed love Roriga. Brandon closed his eyes with a sharp intake of breath. And he loves her, he added. I've seen it, he added. I've seen Lyanna, barely older than she is now, sitting near the Iron Throne with her Targaryen king, he told them. One of the dwarfs in attendance crushed his fist on the table, making it crack. Then the child choose her fate. He said, you know our ways, Lord Almighty, he added, looking at Brandon, a woman is free to choose her spouse or to take none. Brandon felt his mouth dry. That meant that the dwarfs would not follow them south to avenge Lyanna's abduction, because they did not see it as such. They saw it as a choice, and dwarfs treasured freedom of choice almost as much as their jewels and gems. My daughter has not chosen any fate, he snapped. She's a child still. Yet she's made choices of an adult, the dwarf pointed out. A woman is grown when she acts like one. And the fact that she chose to elope with this dragon prince, it means she's a woman and should be treated as such, he said. No blood shall be spilled over a made choice. And if she has been forced, his lord father snapped, my son is a boy, he is not yet fit to declare possible futures as if set in stone. Benjen made to reply to that jab, but Lyra grabbed his wrist in her hand and shook her head discreetly. His lord father was after all raising a good point. If Lyanna had been forced to elope, things would change, but he was unsure if the dwarfs would see Lyanna being manipulated or deceived by Roriga and thus conducted to made a determinate choice with a forcing. The dwarf in attendance clicked his tongue against his teeth and shook his head. Do you have proof she was forced away? He asked. The proofs we have are that the girl sold her own horse and had it ride the opposite way to the one she took. She was covering her own tracks. She did not want to be found, he pointed out, and if the girl was deceived or manipulated is neither here nor there, he added. It should have befallen on you as her father to educate her better. The last jab, full of scorn towards his father, made clear the stance the dwarfs would take on this would not budge, unless they could prove that Lyanna had been physically forced. Could Lyanna had left everything behind for the chance of the love she had dreamed for? He knew she had a bit resented him, the happiness she had found with her silver wife, and that she disliked the match their lord father had been arranging with Lord Baratheon. But would she had taken matters in her own hand? The same girl who had tried to sneak out more than once to follow them to their own proofs and rituals even when she had been told to stay put. Was she willful enough and immature enough to let someone manipulate her in such a way? His lady mother flinched at the tone of the dwarf and his lord father became red in the face, his fury rising with his temper. The wolf blood. His pride. You would abandon your liege in his time of need, he roared then, and the chief shaman in attendance rang his bell. That is not what our friend is saying, mighty lord, he stated. I am sure the dwarfs would follow House Stark and its protector, he added, looking at Brandon. To every war to be fought, yet we cannot spill blood over a free choice of a girl. You're just justifying your backing away from a possible war fought over my daughter. The blood of Winterfell. With all due respect, my lord, the shaman replied, your daughter may be the blood of Winterfell as you justly state, but she has never shown herself interested in any of us nor our customs. If you recall, I offered to take her to the tribes and have her learn our ways more than once, yet you refused. The girl never did take interest in us, in any of us, beyond us being Stark's men, he added, and while that is not a fault of the girl, it doesn't change we don't know her near enough to choose to fight a war for the possibility she might have been abducted instead of eloped willingly. Brandon cursed under his breath. All this talk was making him feel lightheaded and he missed his wife. My wife has been taken hostage as well, he stated, using her filial devotion to her mother. She had been led into a trap, he commented, and is being held hostage by her own father in King's Landing. Would you not raise against that either, he asked. The dwarf touched his braided beard. That is another matter, he commented. Filial piety and devotion is most prized among our kind. Your wife did not go willingly for some whim of hers. If she went and was deceived and is now held against her consent, he added, we would fight for her. On the grounds she is held forcibly against her consent by her father, he stated. Brandon nodded. What if Lyanna has been similarly deceived and is now held against her consent, he asked, feeling like he had found a breach in the dwarf logic to deny them their help. The dwarf sent him a scathing glare, signaling that Brandon had indeed hit the nail of the head. If you can prove she has been deceived and is now held against her will, we would fight for you to free her, he stated, but, the Greensra has spoken. He has told us of the future he has seen, he added. Why should I not want a northern, stark queen beside the Iron Throne? What better way to ensure the northern prosperity and my people's prosperity, he wondered out loud. Lady Lyanna must have been deceived, Maester Wallers advocated passionately. I knew nothing of her interest in the prince, he stated, but lately she had started spending more time with me, asking me questions about the south and the southern courts and politics. Brandon observed him as he went on. I was very pleased by it, especially since her match with Lord Baratheon was made public, he added. I thought she had finally decided to take her duties to her southern husband seriously and was preparing for her role as Lady of Storm's End. She told me of how she was sure that in the south she could help her family gain better access to the stores during winter and at a less cost, and thus making sure we survived winter much more easily. I could not have imagined she meant as a queen. If Lyanna had chosen to follow Rhaegar because she thought it would meant that she could marry him, become queen and manage to help the north, all the while managing to get the recognition she had always felt like she lacked. He could see her do something so foolhardy. This changed things. Even if the dwarf mind if she was deceived out of her duty toward the folk of the north, he stated, man, dwarfs, giants and shamans as well as children and skin changers alike, and was now taken hostage, we would fight for her. But, if she is willingly staying with the Dragon Prince and the Greenseer sees her future beside the throne, I see no reason to fight over her. The shaman nodded. But Mahonia, sitting next to her husband, shook her head. Her husband, the chief of the children of the forest stationed near Winterfell, took the word. Then we cannot trust the visions so much, he said. Benjen Stark is strong in his abilities, but most of them are latent still, to the point he oft mistakes dream from vision. It took Brandon one more look to recognize the truth in the children chief's statement, for his brother's cheeks inflamed and he looked down to his feet. This changes things, the dwarf commented, folding his gloved hands over the dent he had made on the table. Perhaps, Maester Wallers conceded, we might be able to reach a better conclusion if we were to go to the king with this matter, he stated. King Aerys has publicly condemned this questionable behavior of his firstborn, as has Prince Viserys, he pointed out. Maybe if you, my lord, were to go to King's Landing you could discuss this matter with him. And take the Lady Vielle back with you to Winterfell as a show of good faith, he said. Especially since Lord Benjen's visions, for how astounding, cannot be relied upon this well yet, he pointed out gently towards his brother. Brandon would have wanted to defend Benjen, but if his brother was not sure of his visions he could do nothing about it. And Lyanna and Vielle were depending on them to save them. After all, Maester Wallers added, the king has granted your son, the Lord Brandon, his only daughter in marriage. He said he would not have done so if he disregarded you and the north, he pointed out. Brandon did not like this idea, but the point was moot. They needed to do something, they needed to act, and soon. His lord father looked at his wife and sighed. I could go to King's Landing, he stated. After all, Brandon said that Aerys was gentle towards Vielle and already started to question his oldest son's behavior. He added, besides, if I were to demand Lyanna release publicly at court, Aerys could not say no to me, and I could bring both Vielle and Lyanna back home. It sounded almost too good to be true. Lyanna nodded, her jaw clenched. Then go, and swift tidings to you, husband, she said. Bring our daughters back home. Brandon nodded. I will come with you, he stated, and his lord father turned and glared at him with such a fierceness that Brandon almost stumbled back a couple of steps. We need you to be here, in the north, he stated. Your sons cannot risk their father as well as their mother. And the north would follow you to war, while Aerys might be more moved about my higher apparent station, as would the lords of the south, he added. Your wife needs you to prepare for war in case anything goes wrong. The north needs to be ready. You stay, and this is an order of the head of your house, he concluded. Brandon paled. He stood up then, Osric balanced against his chest and walked to his father. He towered over the man of a good head, but his father didn't look intimidated by his height as he so often did. He merely kept looking at him. He knew he had him cornered. Filial piety and devotion were values most prized by the people of the North, and he knew they would follow Brandon better than Ricard to war, since he had been chosen by the North to defend it. He hated it. He wanted to see his wife. "I entrust to you my wife, father," he murmured. "Bring her back to me," he pleaded. His father's eyes colored with pity and fondness toward him. "I swear to you, my son," he stated, "I will do all that I can to bring your wife back to you and give back their mother to your children. The North is entrusted to you, while I am away," he proclaimed before he twisted and strode away, accompanied by the maester to prepare for his voyage south. Brandon did not like it at all. Osric started to cry in his arms, and he looked down to his son's beloved face. A face that reminded him so much of Vial it hurt. "Please, Bunner man. Hold tight, help is coming. Once I get you back, I'm not letting you out of my sight ever again." Notes. So Vial is plotting and trying to ruin everyone's careers in KL, trying to defend Elia and her children, and she finds out about the pyromancers and their new job. Will she keep them in her fist like she hopes for long? What may happen? And what of Mace Tyrell, will he stand by them? In which was is Roderick building support with the folk? And Wallace, what is your game really? Who are you supporting for real? Has Roriger actually lied to Lyanna when he told her that her family had accepted their choices? Was he lied to? And if yes, for whom is Wallace working? As always, sending all my love. G. Chapter 32, Avalia 13. Summary. King's Landing. Notes. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Avalia 13. I'm headed straight to the castle. They wanna make me their queen. And there's a old man sitting on a throne. And saying, I probably shouldn't be so mean. And there's an old man sitting on a throne. And saying, I should probably keep my pretty mouth shut. Avalia carded a hand through her silver golden locks, adjusting the northern hairstyle she had demanded her maid, a southern maid, put on her head. It was simple, the frontal locks twisted and braided, secured in a knot at the back of her head, and the rest of the waves falling down her back, her expression thunderous. Lady Shara, not very far from her, sat at the window stitching, rolled her eyes and shook her head. You should start wearing more southern-looking dresses, Your Highness, she had suggested, and forget that hideous necklace and hairstyles. We're back south, where we belong. Avalia couldn't help but get mad at her. My sons are northern, Shara, she had pointed out, and so is my husband. I am a Stark of Winterfell now. The reply of her maid had chilled her to the bone. You always will be a Targaryen of Dragonstone, she had replied, pointing at her trays in the mirror. Your eyes are Valyrian purple and your hair silver gold of old. Forget the North. Forget the North. Forget the North. Forget the North. In that moment Avalia had decided it was futile, useless to try and discuss of this matter with her lady-in-waiting, for how true Vial felt the friendship binding them two together. Once she finally returned north, she would free Lady Shara of her duty to her, send her from her household. She'll find a suitable match for her in the south, and while she'd always look fondly back to their childhood spent together, that didn't mean she'd let Shara try and corrupt the happiness she had found north. Especially because she didn't want to condemn Lady Shara to the unhappiness that the North seemed to bring to her. She was finally, depending on what was to happen, summoned to court, which meant she could finally get out of Maegor's holdfast where she had been sequestered by her kingly father without having to sneak out secretly. This had happened well after her rooms and apartment had been searched on her father's and brother's order after her queenly mother's escape in the dead of the night. They had completely searched her rooms and left them in such a state that her maids had taken 3 days to bring everything back to order and tidy it the way she liked it. Her heavily pregnant mother, who had escaped in the dead of the night, aided by her brother-in-laws to reach Roriger wherever he was, most possibly in the Riverlands, because he was not on Dragonstone, and join his rebelling party. Elia had been sequestered in Maegor's holdfast as well, under the guise of keeping her and the children protected, but truly using them as hostages, if not against Roriger, who anyway didn't seem to overly care about their fate, judging by the way he was acting as if they didn't exist, against Prince Doran in Dorne. Today she would officially ask to be let return home to her sons. She meant to plead on her maternal duty towards them and to her duty toward her husband, to appeal also the lords and ladies of the court. Make them emphasize with her situation and by default with Elia's. She knew her plead would fall on deaf ears with her father and her brother, especially since Tywin Lannister was back at court for however briefly. Jaime had told her his father had finally had success into his several attempts to bind House Lannister and House Targaryen together, since her kingly father had promised him to marry Viserys to his only daughter, Lady Cersei. The girl was supposed to reach court soon, if she had not already arrived, she thought, noticing Jaime's absence. Avalia didn't know if her father truly meant to go forth with such a thing or if he had chosen to do so, offering Viserys up to marriage to Cersei, only to secure the support of Tywin Lannister after he had refused to marry Inys to Cersei years ago. My Lady Avalia turned and looked up in the eyes of Sir Roderick. Her loyal knight had been coming and going, as discreetly as possible, from Maegor's Holdfast and the city, where many of their soldiers were instated. Brandon had sent them behind them after a couple of weeks so that they might reach King's Landing in case it was needed to help her. They were helping Maester Lewin with the people, making sure they knew that it was House Stark of Winterfell that was taking care of them. Roderick, she asked softly, her hand rising to her necklace, the necklace the dwarfs had gifted her when they had come to Winterfell, her thoughts running to her sons. Maybe, she thought, they've started talking and walking already and I've missed it all. It is time, my lady, he told her, and Avalia nodded softly, standing up from her vanity and adjusting her green skirts as she steeled herself for the session of court. Lady Shara set aside her own needlework and stood up as well to accompany her to court. They left Maegor's Holdfast behind and Viel prayed to all the gods willing to listen, that she managed to avoid war and bloodshed as long as possible. Roderick, ever loyal, always at her side, flanked her to her right, and together they reached the throne room where the lords and the ladies of the Seven Kingdoms were reunited. To her surprise, 5 Lannister guards stopped her short in her tracks as she was to walk inside, and when they made way, Cersei Lannister, glorious in her golden and ruby red crown, walked to her, with her face cocked to the side and a smirk in place on her plump lips. Cersei was a very beautiful young woman, tall just enough, with an ample bosom and narrow waist, wide hip bones and an elegance she had inherited from her lady mother. Her hair were golden and fell in waves, secured by a lion clasp into an intricate, braided updo. She had underlined her emerald eyes with a line of dark kohl, which made them shine as wildfire. The scar on her cheek, taking from under her eye and curving over her upper lip, did nothing to make her less beautiful or ill-favored. It gave her face that sort of edge. The Lioness of the Rock, it seemed, had something to share. Lady Cersei, she greeted. I see you've come to court, she commented. How do you fare, she asked curtly, not offering the other woman a curtsy. She was not yet Viserys' wife, and anyway, Viel remained a princess by blood and a great lady by marriage. Cersei, for now, could only claim to be a great lady by birth. Lady Avalia, from her lips it sounded almost insulting, taunting, but Viel did not let it bother her. She folded her hands before herself and smiled at her, as if her tone had went unnoticed or unheeded. Cersei, lady that she was not as used as Viel was to the southern court, though she certainly seemed to think she could play it like a fiddle. Or should I call you sister? After all, we'll be sisters soon, she added with a mischievous glint in her eyes. Too bad we won't see much of each other, with you holed up in the cold and stiff north. The north might be cold, my lady, Avalia said, but my husband keeps me plenty warm, she added. I do hope my brother may do the same for you, or the southern court will look like a freezing hell for you, she offered with a smile. Sister, she added in a dismissing tone, making to walk past her. Sir Roderick followed suit, flanking her side when Cersei called her back. You know, I was always jealous of you. Viel stopped in her tracks and looked back at the lady from behind her shoulder. You had it all. All that I wanted. You were a princess, supposed to marry one of your brothers and become a queen. No matter how much I trained and tried, you would always be favored over me, she added. And look at us now, she commented. Look how far you've fallen and I risen. One day you'll have to call me your grace and bow to me like I had to you. Avalia felt her temper flare. She arched a brow. I congratulate you, my lady, she said. I hope the golden crown you mean to crown yourself into will console you when winter comes, she added, turning around and walking away, without sparing her another glance. Beautiful and snideful she may be, but Viel had bigger fish to catch and fry. Are you all right, my lady? Sir Roderick asked in a murmur, and Viel, for the umpteenth time, felt grateful for his presence at her side. The northerners may be stiff and cold and raw, but they were truer than many others. She assured him. A dragon will not concern itself with the mosquito trying to prickle at its scale, she added with a dismissive gesture of her hand. But, nothing would have prepared her for the shock of seeing Rossart the pyromancer at her father's side, his glinting eyes fixed on her with a smirk as he waved to her enthusiastically. Gods be good, she paled, turning around and finding Selûne gaze between the crowd. She nudged with her eyes toward the Iron Throne next to which were Viserys and Rossart, and Selûne mouthed to her that the two men that had meant to send Rossart from the capital had been assassinated and that the man had returned to her father's service. Jaime was standing guard with Sir Barristan Selmy at the feet of the Iron Throne. His expression was sour and saddened, and Vial could see the purple bruises and torn lip on his face and the stiff way he held himself, signaling that he had paid for his involvement in the failed exile of Rossart and the attempt at taking in hand the pyromancer. Princess Avilia, Lord Merryweather, her father's hand, called forth, stand forth. Everyone's eyes fell on her, Viserys' purple ones fixed intently on her. Vial grabbed stiffly her skirts in her hands as she walked at the center of the hall and curtsied. Your Grace, she greeted. My noble father, she added. She remained with her knees bent as her father had not yet given her permission to rise. And this condition went on for a couple of minutes before her kingly father turned to Viserys. She does look good on her knees, son, he commented. A pity that northern has seen such a look before us, he added. Vial felt Roderick go stiff and prayed to all the gods that the mother would stay his hand and still her father's tongue. Lord Merryweather laughed at the jape, followed by the rest of the court, and Viserys snickered. Indeed, father, he agreed, and Aenys would dare try to snatch such a morsel for himself, without sharing. Avilia grit her teeth and clenched her fists. Her knees were starting to get sore and pain was starting to flash in her limbs, but she refused to tremble. She refused to shake. Stand up, daughter, her father ordered solemnly, and Avilia did not breath out in relief, refusing to show him how painful it had been to stay bent for such a long time. Yet, her eyes, purple ablaze, must have showed him the contempt and fury she was holding in. Look at her. Aerys japed with an hysterical laugh, didn't even break a sweat, and look at her eyes. She's used to this, aren't you, daughter, he demanded of her. On your knees often, are you? Why was he so intent on insulting her, she wondered, trying to rein in her fury as the court followed the Lord Hand suit and laughed at her expanse, though forced that it was. What reign of terror had her father instated? That would not be your Grace's business in any form, father, she pointed out. As the seven-pointed star says, what happens between man and wife is private and solely discussion of them two, she pointed out easily. A murmur grew in the court and the High Septon nodded sagely. Many lords and ladies nodded as well at her comment. And on the same matter, I have a sacred duty to my husband and my sons, she added. Since my mother is untraceable and I can be no longer of help to her, I would like to be dismissed from court so that I can return to my husband and sons. Denied, her father, the king replied stiffly, his eyes ablaze, just like Vial had supposed he would. You're still under inquiry for your mother's disappearance, he added. I thought your Grace had already received my most noble brother's report, she said. I am innocent of any accuse of involvement with my mother's escape from Maegor's Holdfast. Viserys clenched his jaw. Indeed, he stated, yet we heard peculiar and preoccupying news from the north and about your involvement in certain matters here in the capital. Vial stiffened. What kind of news, she asked. Of which crime do you mean to accuse me and my kin of, in this court? Viserys smirked. It looks like your noble good sister, the Lady Lyanna of House Stark, has eloped with our brother, Rhaegar, thus securing him and his rebelling forces the support of the north, he told her. Gods have mercy, she closed her eyes. She had to act, and fast. Forgive me, Lyanna. But I have to defend my niece and nephew. They are undefended. I think, brother, that you are mistaking the isolate act of a girl, she said, barred the possibility that she might have been abducted by our noble brother, instead of having eloped with him willingly, for the support of the whole north. The murmurs grew louder in the court. Be what it may, Viserys said, you will remain here until the truth of this is not discerned. What more, can you deny your involvement in the attempt on the life of Lord Rossart, our head pyromancer? Here's my chance. I don't deny it, she affirmed. For the shock of the entire court, I acted in the best interests of your Grace and the population of King's Landing, albeit no attempt on his life has been made, but purely an exile, until your Grace had the time to inquire about this matter. She gestured for Sir Roderick and he nodded to Maester Lewin, who brought forth the still of wildfire wrapped into a cloth. The court was clearly on edge as Vial exposed the still, showing it to everyone. Thousands of hundreds of these, she said, litter the undergrounds of the keep. She declared, surely, from what I've been able to understand, your grace had meant to have some batches prepared to defend the city from an invading army. She added, but Lord Rossart has exceeded the quantities and is producing enough to have the whole city blow. Blaming the conduct on the man instead of her father meant that if her father wanted to keep the throne and the crown on his head, and not have a revolt at his hands immediately, he had to turn on Lord Rossart, claim he knew nothing of this, and thus his attempts at mining the city would be slowed down and his head executor taken out of the equation meant cripple his wildfire plot in the crib. I investigated the matter myself because, while I reached the small thermal baths underground for my health, I happened across a whole underroom littered by stills and ampoules of wildfire. She said, I suppose your grace should reward my so-called attempt at Lord Rossart's life as it was done in his most noble name. The murmurs grew in intensity, and as she had expected, Lord Mace Tyrell walked forth, demanding the attention of the whole room. What is the meaning of this, your grace? What treason is this? He demanded. There was a murmur of consent in the whole throne hall. Lord Merryweather as Lord Hand was highly incapable, Vial found, but he did try to smooth things over. I'm sure Princess Vial has widely exaggerated, he stated. She's a woman, and as all women she's bound to have a lesser understanding of these matters, and while her intentions might have been good, his voice broke off as another interjected. She's telling the truth. Sir Lewin Martell came forth, flanking her side, speaking for Elia as well. My men have been down there as well, he affirmed. The whole undergrounds are being filled with wildfire, your grace. The whole court erupted in cries of indignation, and Lord Rossart was grabbed by Sir Jaime and Sir Barristan to bring him in the centre of the hall to respond of this accusation before he could say the king had given the order. Viserys took hold on the situation as her father merely sat there, on the Iron Throne, his nails so long they almost curved and his eyes ablaze, laughing maniacally. It chilled her to the bones. Of course Maester Pycelle tried to intervene. We must shed light to this matter, he stated. For sure, Lord Rossart must have misunderstood the assignment his grace must have given him to use wildfire to protect the city, and thus he has mistaken the quantities earned. Lord Rossart was brought just before her, and in his gaze Vial knew she had made a terrible enemy as the lords and ladies erupted in demands to have clarifications and that this treason was to be punished. Your grace, Lord Rossart tried. I beg of you, he exclaimed, tell them I did no wrong. I am protecting them all. His eyes were fury and paranoid. But to no avail. As her kingly father kept laughing like a madman atop the Iron Throne, Viserys stepped forth and, to quiet the whole court, demanded the man was to be executed on charges on treason. His purple eyes though were set on her. She was the one he'd like to punish, she knew. Before he could be executed, though the man tried to launch himself to Vial, he escaped the hold of Sir Barristan and attacked her, or tried to, as Sir Roderick was ready with his sword as was Sir Lewin. In the end, neither of them needed to do anything because before he could reach her, the tip of a sword peeked from inside his neck and blood started to ooze from the wound. Lord Rossart fell face first onto the stone floor, his blood drowning him and creating a pool on the floor staining her skirts before she had the time to jump back, her heart in her throat as she looked from the dying man up in the emerald eyes of Jaime, as he cleaned the blade on the white cloak of his armor and nodded to her, his face bruised and wounded, but his gaze determined. Her heart was thundering in her ears as the tragedy was consumed. She looked from Jaime's contorted face and to her brother's purple eyes and could see in Viserys' eyes that this was just the beginning and that they were not done yet. She straightened her shoulders. She looked down on the body and shuddered. I had told you, she thought, feeling nauseous, I had told you, you would die if you returned. Why didn't you accept my mercy? Guards! Viserys thundered, escort Princess Avilia back to her quarters. She's feeling ill, he added. Vial looked up in Roderick's eyes and the man nodded to her, sheathing his blade back into its scabbard. She grabbed Sir Lewin's arm in her hand for a moment, to convey her gratitude, and he nodded to her. They were on the same side, after all. She left the court hall, knowing now, that war was unavoidable. She just hoped Brandon had had enough time to prepare the North and that it would end as swiftly as possible. Notes. So many things happened beneath the surface here, can you count them all? I can't. Hope you have enjoyed. We start to get into the nick of things. Rossart has died, goodbye and good riddance, honestly. Aerys is always more mad, but Viserys has a better grasp on things, despite being half mad himself, or perhaps only cruel. Avilia managed to avoid any kind of greater confrontation with her family, managing to keep things balanced, but how long can she hope to play this game? As always, sending all my love, G. Chapter 33, Lyanna 6, Brandon 9 and Avilia 14. Summary. The rebellion explodes. Harrenhal. Winterfell. KL. Notes. I should advise you there is triggering content in this chapter as sheer violence, and we all know the horrific ways Aes went around with things, so expect a very difficult triplet of chapters up ahead. Especially Vial's 1. Sorry in advance, if you don't feel up to it. Truly Lyanna 1 has no violence, while Brandon's 1 has very little only at the end. I will put a resume of the chapter at the end. Enjoy the read. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Lyanna 6. Life at Harrenhal was somewhat less dreamy than she had hoped. Rhaegar was always hurdled in his solar, the Solar Lord Went had granted him, with either Lord Varys or Lord Connington or both, which left Lyanna mostly alone because Queen Rhaegar, albeit polite, still refused to treat her in a way different than she would of a mistress, no matter that Rhaegar had asked her to change her behavior toward her. Lyanna on her part refused to bend low and die for the woman. She was pregnant and Lyanna was willing to cut her some slack because of it, but that didn't mean she had to bend over and let every humiliation the queen served her go unnoticed. It was not in her blood, in the blood of the wolf. But, as Queen Rhaegar had commented herself, what is the blood of the wolf if compared to that of the dragon? Lyanna hated even more that Queen Rhaegar seemed to have only one mission, and that was convincing Rhaegar to mend things over with his lawful wife, advocating that he had no grounds for an annulment since Elia had been true and faithful to him, that she had given him 2 children, 1 son, both healthy and robust, and that the lords of Westeros would more likely rally behind him if he showed himself as a good, honorable king who gave importance to the oaths he took instead than disregarding them completely by choosing for himself a new bride, who could not compare neither in blood neither in attitude to his wedded wife. Elia was not present in the keep, yet her shadow seemed to occupy every corner and crook and service of the immense keep. Her and her children seemed to haunt Lyanna whenever she went, and little did it serve for Rhaegar to console her and reassure her about it, when the news they were receiving from the court were that Elia had basically created a niche of supporters in her son's name. What hope could Lyanna and her future children with Rhaegar have if her prince had to bend to the demand of a Dornish princess too stubborn to accept her husband's decree? Lyanna would not have supposed the frail, soft woman she had seen, at the brink of tears, in the stands of the tourney of Harrenhal, to be of so stubborn disposition. She had been helpless to keep her man to her side, something Lyanna believed was because she and Rhaegar were a bad match to begin with, yet she somehow had rose against all expectations by publicly condemning her husband's actions in taking her for his own and trying to build a niche of supporters for herself in the capital. Rhaegar didn't want her exposed to too much information from the capital, but she had overheard Lord Varys speaking to Lord John Connington about it, about how Princess Elia Martell had publicly denounced Rhaegar's action in taking Lyanna for his own and was trying to build a faction of supporters in name of her children. Lyanna would have applauded her that, she thought, as she herself disliked the idea of children being bastardized, and since she couldn't know that Rhaegar meant to have the children legitimized as Martells, she was just defending her children and found herself thinking she had never misconstrued Vial, for if she had even an ounce of Princess Elia love for her children she would fight to defend Osric and Conlead. Lyanna had already in mind to ask Rhaegar, as a wedding gift for the children, to be legitimized as Starks alone once Brandon's marriage to Vial was annulled and she was married to her brother and lover, Innis. Personally Lyanna did not like Innis overly much. The man seemed half obsessed with Vial. He spoke often of how alone he felt without her at his side, and she thought oft that Brandon was twice the man this princeling was, yet she had never believed Vial to be worthy of him, despite her royalty status. And it had appeared to be right, as the woman herself was doing nothing to return to Winterfell and to her husband and kids, probably just waiting for word to join her brother lover and marry him. She turned the corner of the immense corridor and suddenly stilled as she caught sight of Lord Varys. The eunuch was a man Lyanna was uneasy around. He always observed her with this watchful eyes. For her short time in Harrenhal with the party loyal to Rhaegar, Lyanna had understood a couple of things she hadn't been privy of before running away from home and to run to her destiny. For once the entirety of the faction favorable to Rhaegar disliked the fact that Rhaegar was attempting to set aside Princess Elia. She could understand that, as Elia, despite her many faults, had already proved herself somewhat worthy of Rhaegar by giving him 2 sons, where Lyanna was barely a woman, not yet forged in their eyes, but it was nothing that Lyanna could not rectify, as she took a more active role in her prince entourage, something Roriger had discouraged for the time being. Because of the still troublesome waters they were navigating with Elia in King's Landing. My queen, the eunuch bowed low, and Lyanna, hidden behind the corner, had not seen the queen approach, and she wondered if she had stumbled upon a secret encounter Roriger knew nothing about. Forget the courtesies, Spider. The woman was acerbic in a way Lyanna would not have phantomed before meeting her. She looked beautiful, despite her almost 40 and more years of age. She was grateful and ever dutiful. She never forgot her social station, and neither let Lyanna forget hers, nor the role she had come to cover, as she and Roriger were yet not married in the eyes of gods and men. Tell me of my child. The eunuch must have stood up because the rustling of his vests and fabrics signaled thus preoccupying news. Your Grace, he admitted. Concerning even, he added, looks like Princess Avilia has managed to put an halt to King Aerys' plan to mine the capital in wildfire, he said. The woman sighed. That girl, she hissed, too brave for her own good. Too stubborn too, she added. Has she been put in peril because of it? Aerys favors Rossart very much, and Viserys will not let such a loyal servant escape him. It looks like. He stopped short, and Lyanna wondered if she might have made a noise she was not supposed to, alerting them of her presence. I am rude to even tell you, my queen, he offered instead. Jaime Lannister executed Lord Rossart, he admitted, after Princess Avilia exposed him and his supposed treachery in trying to mine, against the orders of his king, the entire city in wildfire in open court. Lyanna almost couldn't contain her own sob of surprise, but was thankful Queen Rolla sobbed in surprise too, thus helping concealing her presence as Lyanna clamped a hand over her mouth. We have to get my daughter away from the capital, Spider. The woman demanded. Let alone Aerys, she added, but Viserys, he will never forget a slight either perceived or real. And in doing so, Vial has put herself in open opposition against her brother and her father the king. It could be more difficult than we had open, my queen, the eunuch replied. It seems like Princess Avilia is not left out of the sight of that northern guard who always follows her, and looks like she has managed to get inside the keep. Several loyal men to House Stark, she added. My little birds call them the Shadow Men, he explained, because they follow the princess unnoticed like shadows, he admitted. So? Queen Rolla rasped. Kill them all, she added. I don't care, my daughter must be safely conducted here. I doubt that would help, Your Grace, the eunuch said, for your daughter has openly sided with Princess Elia, he added, to Lyanna's utmost surprise. Some even say she is the one actively behind the formation of the niche of supporters Elia Martell seems to be leading in the capital. The woman muttered something Lyanna could not understand. A mother would do anything for her children, she said sagely, and my children are most precious to me, Spider. Find a way. Sweet and determined, she was growing to like Queen Rolla all the more. Elia Martell as well, the woman added, seeing the party that should serve Roriger divided doesn't help anyone. If Roriger could be persuaded to take 2 wives instead of setting aside Elia, the lords of the realm would stand behind us better. Lyanna disliked her even more for that. If Roriger did not set aside Elia, no matter that Lyanna wished no ill to the proud princess, Lyanna would never be accepted. She'd always be considered only his concubine, and her children would face a worse fate. She could not let that happen. She had been opposed to the idea of being bonded to Roriger without a decree formally annulling his marriage to Elia, but alas, they could anyway. Lyanna could be patient enough to wait and bear through the insults thrown her way until Roriger became anointed king and annulled for sure his marriage to Elia, making her his only spouse. After all, she had come to realize there would always be people who much preferred to see the Dornish next to her prince than her. She just would have to wear out those she could and show them who truly was in charge. She just had to build herself some supporters. Prince Innis already seemed to favor her, because to her surprise, some lords, Lord Connington as well as the Spider, would have preferred if Roriger did put aside his wife Elia, maybe secluding her to Dragonstone with her children and married, instead, as chief consort his sister, Avilia, who'd give him pure Targaryen children. Lyanna hand round to her womb almost absent-mindedly. She was not yet with child, though she and Roriger had started to share the bedchamber as soon as Roriger had welcomed her to Harrenhal. They had yet to do anything beyond some caress that Lyanna would not have considered appropriate, and sometimes, in the night, his body was dark, cloaked in the shadow of the slumbering darkness, and his touch was scorching, his eyes glinting purple and darker than any amethyst she had ever seen. And she would do so, she vowed, no matter the costs. They were bonded on the Isle of the Faces, in the middle of the God's Eye Lake near the keep. Lord Went and his lady served as witnesses, and the septon who bound them together was a small, frail-looking man. He bound their hands together with a silken ribbon of blue, and Lionel and Roriga declared their love for one another before the eyes of gods and men. He is mine and I am his. She is mine and I am hers. From this day to the last of my days. And then Roriga had kissed her, his lips had been scorching and hot against her chilled ones, and she was bare-shouldered, without her bridal cloak, but Roriga remedied that immediately by gifting her with a cloak of red and black, making her officially his, a Targaryen princess by marriage. And, cloaked of her marriage cloak, red and black, and crowned by he prince's love and kiss, they made their way back to the keep. Lady Went had organized a feast in their honor, but, when Queen R'hllor saw them enter, arm in arm, and she cloaked in the red and black of House Targaryen, she looked ill. The woman stood up suddenly, a nerve buckling in her jaw as she looked from her, to her hand at her son's arm and her son's face. "What have you done, son?" she demanded, her voice almost shrill. "I have married Lady Lyanna," he said. "She is my rightful wife before the eyes of gods and men alike," he replied curtly. "She's now your queen," he added, "as I am your king by your own admission." Queen R'hllor in fact had demanded they called her Queen Mother, instead than Queen Consort, as she wholly supported her son's right to the Iron Throne as its king. She had even started to wear a veil under her crown, as if to signal that she now considered herself a widow and a saint, devout mother of the king, instead of a woman and queen in her own right. Lyanna smugly jutted her chin up, feeling empowered by her husband's determination to see her respected at his side. "You are heavily pregnant," he added, "thus I won't ask you to show the respect that property demands you show your queen, but remember her station when you speak to her from now on. Any disrespect toward her shall be considered as if done toward me," he declared, looking to everyone in the hall as if to tell it of everyone. "I was so scared," she thought. "I am not anymore." Queen R'hllor made a sickened face, but gripped her skirts tightly in her hand. Her purple eyes sparkled with unshed tears at the humiliation her son had just served her, and Lyanna felt sorry for it, indeed. The woman had been hard with her, edging on disrespectful, but she was always her husband's mother. She wished they would have better terms between them. Then, Queen R'hllor dipped into a rigid curtsy. Those present, still too stunned to speak, seemed to be shaken into action by that, because they mimicked her. Lyanna found their homages to be empty as they were rigid. They misliked the action Roriga had taken, but they would have to accept it as Roriga was king, their king, a king they were supporting in face of capital sentence if they lost, and they were bound to his will. Maybe, she thought, they would like her better if she were to show herself pious and devout in her filial duty to her now mother by law. Thus she ushered forward, gripping the elbow of the woman, the table standing between them, and smiled at the woman. "Do not strain yourself, mother," she cooed, thinking of how much the woman would have liked her own mother for sure. "I wish to ask of you no honor or homage," she said. "My husband has been overly assertive out of love for me. Please, forgive him." It seemed to be the wrong thing to say, for Queen R'hllor studied her. A snarl curved her full lips as she turned away from her. "I find myself ill," she stated. "I will retire to my chambers." With King permission, she drawled, the formality hissing like a leash over Lyanna Cheek and his new wife. "Of course," she added almost like an afterthought. Lyanna turned to Roriga questioningly, desperately wondering where had she gone wrong, and Roriga seemed half resigned, half furious at his mother. "Go," he granted at last. "My wife would be saddened to know you would strain yourself in your difficult condition when you aren't feeling well," he barked. Queen R'hllor circled the table and swept past her as if she did not exist. Lyanna felt like slapped at that, but the hurt was nursed immediately by her prince, when he rose the dais to her and took her hand in his and kissed the back of it. "This is a joyous occasion, Lyanna," he told her. "Do not concern yourself with her, she'll come around." Lyanna severely doubted that. Nonetheless, her attention was called by Prince Innes, who rose his cup to the ceiling to King Roriga and his queen Lyanna. He toasted, "May they have 1,000 more of these days." Those around him followed his toast, albeit reluctantly. "You knew this would be difficult," she reminded herself. "When your brothers gets here you'll have more than just your husband in your corner and things shall look up again." Brandon 9. He woke with a startled sob tearing at his throat, his eyes blinking open on the canopy. Automatically he outstretched a hand to his side, where his wife usually slept soundless, her moonlight-kissed hair shining like a halo in a sea of darkness on the pillow, her purple eyes closed and her soft, clear eyelash kissing her pale cheeks. Her side of the bed was empty. It was cold. Colder than ice. Starks were built for the cold, but not this type of cold, not the coldness of the sorrow of the missing their woman's embrace. He turned to the other side, giving the back to her side of the bed, and observed the crib of the twins. Soon they would be way too big to share a crib, like they were used to since being born. Though Vial had two made, they sensed his uneasiness, they sensed the absence of their mother, and thus they refused to be put to sleep separately, and while that was adorable, they were beginning to be too big to share a crib, yet Brandon could not bring himself to take away that comfort the twins found in each other, his and his wife's trays forever living on their faces. He rolled to his back again and looked up at the canopy another time, sighing. He knew sleep would elude him now forth, though dawn would not come for a long time still, yet he stood up anyway. On his bedside table rested a small bouquet of wild flowers, of Vial favorites in all shades of pink, yellow and purple. He went to the glass gardens every day, at least once, with his toddlers in tow. They had by now started to move on their own, and they enjoyed playing a bit rough with each other on the grass of the glass gardens, and he picked the most beautiful flowers as he would have if his wife was there. He brought them back to their chamber and kept them beside him always, as they reminded him of her. Of his proud, brave wife. Benjen had told him of how Vial had managed to outsmart everyone in King's Landing. His brother had seen it, of how she had trapped her own father in letting her keep Roderick at her side, and later as she had outsmarted him again by pinning one of his lords for something he had not done, thus putting an halt to their plans. Benjen had come to him with the description of the man as well, telling him that Jaime Lannister had killed him to protect Vial, and Brandon had begrudged him that. He was grateful his wife had been protected, yet he disliked another man doing the deed in his stead, and only later Benjen had been able to put a name to the face, telling him his name was Rossart, yet Brandon could not remember any lord named such. Benjen was extremely gifted as a greenseer, but that meant that he often could not rationalize between truth and dream, between vision and hope, and he was so young yet. Their mother tried to guide him and help him as much as she could. He was a boy, and she was yet not ready to part ways with him yet, to have him trained by the children and the shamans. Thus his talent remained mostly raw and uncontrollable by him, which called for fear of it by him. His lord father was sure that by the time Benjen took up arms for real, using live steel instead than wood, he would learn to train the body and thus also the mind, yet he knew, in his heart, that Benjen needed a different type of training, and he wondered if in shielding him they were doing more damage than good. Despite how honorable of a talent the greenseeing was, he prayed to the gods that his children did not inherit it, hoping they might be spared the fear he could see reflected in Benjen's eyes every time a nightmare turned into a real-life vision. Brandon, as if evoked by his thoughts, his brother's voice cleaved through the night air, falling shrill like brinks falling on the ground. Brandon. Mother, Lyanna. The terror in his voice was such that Brandon shot out of the bed quicker than an arrow released from the bow. Father. Brandon turned around concerned to his children, and, while Osric seemed unperturbed by the noise, Conlead was starting at him with his big, steel-grey eyes open and filled with unshed tears. Brandon. Father. Benjen's voice broke in 1,000 little sobs, yet Brandon could not leave the children alone, so he called at great voice for one of the maids to come. There was always one at hand, for the children needed yet to nurse and to be changed during the night. Lyanna, mother. No, get away from the fire. You're going to get burned. Get away from the fire. Father. His sobs were shaking the ground under his feet. As soon as the children were cared for, Brandon dashed away from his chamber and found his lady mother. Maester Wallace and Benjen hurtled on the stone floor of the corridor. His brother's body was shaking uncontrollably, jerking in every direction, and his lady mother was crying silently and helplessly, calling his name, promising she was there every time the broken sob of mother left his lips, treading her fingers through his dark locks as his eyes looked on, unseeing, completely white. Elsewhere. Father, Benjen sobbed brokenly. Lyanna, mother. His voice was so little, so broken, so quivering that Brandon, despite all of his strength, felt as helpless as a little boy, incapable of defend his brother from this enemy that was waging war against his mind. Get away from the fire, Benjen murmured. Get away from the fire. Get away from the fire. He was trashing so bad on the floor and in their lady mother's arms that at one point his elbow connected with their lady mother's jaw, sending her a few paces away from him as Benjen curled in a ball and continued shaking his head like a madman. Get away. Get away from the fire. You're gonna get burned. Father. Lyanna, mother. Then he started spiraling and started to sob out his wife's name. Vial. He sobbed. Vial, the fire, the city, white stained blood red. Vial, get out of there. Father. Father. Lyanna, mother. A small crowd had formed in the corridor as several between the guests of Winterfell had heard the screams. One of the chieftains of the dwarven clans was present as well, a dwarf dam and a couple of shamans. Yet Brandon cared not for it, throwing himself on the ground, despairing in seeing his brother in such a state, trying to use his sheer force to keep him from trashing and make him feel less alone. "We must give him the milk of the poppy, Lord." Maester Wallace cried out, only to be silenced by the she-dwarf. "Hush," she demanded, "the gods are speaking to the boy." Benjen kept trashing in his arms. "Father! Mother! Lionel!" he cried out, his voice so desperate, so shrill that Brandon feared to become deaf. "Traitor! Traitor! Get away from the fire! Get away! Get away! Vial, get out of there! Father, father, and suddenly Benjen's eyes were back to normal, filled with tears and shining with fear as their lady mother crawled to them again to draw her son in her embrace. "Now, Southerner," the she-dwarf said, "you can give him milk of the poppy." She then turned to him. "You did ill to keep the boy untrained so long," she reprimanded. "The more we wait, the more raw and wild his ability becomes, the harder to control. He must be trained." Brandon looked down at the shivering form of his brother. "It is my father's decision," he tried, but the she-dwarf shook her head. "No. It is yours now." Maester Wallace came closer with a vial in hand, bending down to give some milk of the poppy to Benjen. When his brother screamed again, "No," he shouted, "Traitor! Traitor! Traitor!" he kept darkly chanting, and when Maester Wallace paled so, Brandon narrowed his eyes. In any other situation any lord would have dismissed his younger sibling claims due his state, but Benjen had just seen the gods knew what in his vision, and the Maester knew the Starks placed a lot of credence of the visions of a green seer. "I am trying to help you, my lord," Maester Wallace tried, but Brandon was edging closer to him as his lady mother was suspiciously eyeing the Maester. It took but another step from the man for Benjen's eyes to roll back in his skull, and suddenly, as if lacking a will of his own, the Maester was nothing but a puppet, his hands shaking and jerking in the air. His eyes rolled back as well, as he threw himself against the stone wall, once, twice, face first, until his whole face was bloody. "Enough!" Brandon screamed, "Enough!" "Benjen!" The cries had alarmed also the children, for Mahonia and her husband ran from around the corner and both threw themselves at Benjen, chanting in the old tongue to get him to stop. Maester Wallace's body flew to the wall again twice before Benjen, tensed as if a wolf about to pounce on his prey, lost his senses, and Maester Wallace collapsed to the ground without strength, a puppet to whom they had suddenly cut off all strings. The vial broken on the stone floor attracted his attention, for it had carved a small hole in the first tile of the floor, fuming dark green smoke. Brandon looked up from it as the she-dwarf snarled, "Traitor!" She spat. He tried to kill his little lord. He looked at his lady mother, and by her gaze he knew that, as soon as Benjen would be settled, she would visit the Godswood, the only place where she, trained as she had been, was able to greenseer. "Have him thrown in the kennels," he ordered. "Wake him up with a bucket of cold water, the one you use for the pigs," he snapped as he bent down, whisking his brother's senseless, warm body. He was running a slight fever, up from the ground and adjusting his hold on his legs before carrying him back to his bedchamber, followed by his lady mother. Whatever Benjen must have seen had terrorized him terribly. His hand curled around the medallion he was wearing at his neck, the very medallion she had strapped at his neck the day of their wedding as a token of their marriage. "Be safe, my love. My father is coming. I should have gone too." "Father," Benjen cried in his dreamless sleep. "Father." Whatever must have terrorized his brother so, Brandon vowed to avoid, to forbid, to not let happen. And, first things first, he needed to make sure of the reason why the Maester they had accepted into their home and that had trusted with their lives and politics had suddenly turned his back to them and acted a traitor. He could excuse Benjen's fervent visions, but know the clear poison that had been tried to be given to Benjen by the man himself. The sun had by now rose too pallid to be the sun of spring, yet Brandon did not care. He seldom felt the warmth of anything since his wife had been away from his side. Yet he donned on his jerkin and changed his breeches and threaded his hands through his hair to comb them back from his forehead, leaving Benjen room and side, his lady mother still at his bedside, to reach, instead, the kennels where he hoped to find at least some answers to his many questions. Vial 14. She gripped her pale blue skirt in her clenched fists, her ankle-high shoes clanking on the stone floor of the Red Keep. Out of breath and out of herself. She had known her good father had reached King's Landing thanks to the shadow guards that were following her around and lived and hid in the streets. Though she had yet to hear from any of them after she had been alerted of her good father's presence in the capital 3 days prior. She had been kept secluded in Magor Holdfast since she had received the news, and neither her nor Roderick had been let out of their chambers. Jaime had not been let enter either. She didn't know if by his own father or by hers, and Avilia had awaited patiently, also as counselled by Lady Shara, who had promised to try and get out to manage to get some news from Lady Ashuradain, Princess Elia lady-in-waiting, who herself was sequestered in her apartments with her children. She knew Viserys had tried to take the children away from the mother, but Prince Lewin Martell had forbid him to do so and had taken post outside of the princess chamber, making sure she and her children were not separated for any reason. Lady Shara had told her to try and keep quiet and not antagonize too much Prince Viserys and the king. She had also tried to convince her to fled the city and had promised to try and help her to do so, when Avilia had expressed her nerves at leaving her good sister at the mercy of her father and her brother, who had been officially made heir to the Iron Throne the same day his betrothal to Lady Cersei had been finalized. In the same occasion her father had also named Rhaegar as traitor of the realm and guilty of high treason toward his father and king. Lady Shara had reminded her that her place was not in the capital but safe. And Avilia had, to her own shame, really thought of leaving behind her good sister to get back to her husband and her kids. She should have been with them, all along. Her mother's ploy had only served to give her father a valuable hostage in case the North intended on rebelling. She could only hope her good father, of whom Shara had learned had asked audience with the king, managed to convince her father to let her return north to her children and to have Princess Elia and her children restored to the line to the Iron Throne, as he denounced Rhaegar actions and helped them get Lyanna back from him. If the girl would let them take her back, that was. Do not worry about all of that, my princess, Shara had replied to her. Worry about keeping your faith and soon you will be reunited with your family. There had been something about that statement which had rang strange to her ears, but when Vielle had said how much she missed her sons, Shara's face had turned dark and she had promised her boys would be well cared for. When Vielle had frowned, Shara had hastened to specify that Lady Lyra had raised 4 children, 3 of whom male, so there were not safest hands to be than their fathers and their grandmothers. That had quieted her and silenced her fears. I am growing paranoid, she had told herself. Only to learn that morning that her good father had been permitted audition with her father and that he had asked compensation for Lyanna as well as her release, that he had asked that Vielle was to be reunited with her husband, his son, and their children, and that the king helped him get Lyanna back from Rhaegar. While her father had denounced Rhaegar actions and had used them to instate Viserys as crown prince, he had had her good father apprehended yesterday evening on accuses of high treason. When her good father had demanded to be shown proofs of said accusation, Viserys had showed him the letter Avilia had sent to Riverrun, in which she explained of how Lyanna had left willingly, eloping with Rhaegar instead than marrying Robert Baratheon. What more, he had told them that the very fact that Ricard had demanded of the king anything was an act of high treason in itself. Seen the precarious state of the loyalty of House Stark which was in discussion due Lady Lyanna actions. Avilia had managed to learn all about that thanks to a maid, a shy girl that came from the Reach and that had brought the news directly from Lord Tyrell. The girl had refused to tell anyone but the princess under the guise of having brought her, to her request, some flowers to make the life in the keep less grey. The shy girl had charmed every guard that would have stood between them and had been very swift in relaying her message to her. Which had Avilia acted as swiftly as she had managed to get the help she needed to get out of Magor Holdfast by the same 2 guards that had stood vigil outside of Elia apartments the day all of this had started, who Jaime Lannister seemed to have bought thanks to either his gold or their belief that her resistance to fire made her worthy of worship and their services. Her shadow guards, she had learned from Maester Lewin, had been slaughtered in their hiding alcoves in the city by the Golden Cloaks or were in hiding because hunted. He had managed to get the information by one of them who had been lucky enough to make it to his hospital for the ill and the weak and poor before dying. So, Roderick remained her only champion and shield. She knew her good father had also demanded a trial by combat to prove the legitimacy of his demands and the truthfulness of his honor. Trial by combat which was set to have just started. Vielle sped up, ignoring the servants around her, as the 2 guards stopped anyone who tried to detain her or hinder her coming. As soon as she left Magor Holdfast behind, she started to hear the screams and the sobs from the Iron Throne hall. Her steps quickened. Let me not be too late, let me not be too late. The guards posted outside the great hall stopped her short when they saw her approach as the screams grew louder in intensity. Let me through. Avilia demanded, her voice bordering desperation. Let me through. The men wouldn't budge though, so Roderick unsheathed his sword and bared the blade to them, followed by the other two guards. My lord liege is inside that room, his voice dangerously low. Step aside, now. When they did not budge, he attacked at the cry of Winterfell, and as soon as the guards were engaged, Vielle ducked under their fighting bodies and managed to throw herself at the heavy set of doors that led to the great hall of the Iron Throne, pushing them open just enough for her enter. Dark smoke and the smell of cooked iron and flesh filled her nostrils immediately, nauseating her to the point she almost had to gulp back her own vomit. The hall was covered and filled by a dark cloud of smoke, and ladies averted their eyes as soon as they heard her approach. Even over the screams, they were holding handkerchiefs to their noses and lips, those who had not fainted, and even the men looked horrified. Avalia narrowed her eyes as the screams grew in intensity, the word that was broken before now crystal clear. Winterfell. Her good father was screaming. She stepped forth and suddenly she was whisked against an armored chest, her face planted against the golden plate as the screams grew in intensity. "Do not look," Jaime pleaded, his voice thick with emotion, but Avalia pushed at him, as Brandon had once taught her. She had, almost instinctively, set her foot behind his talon. Thus, her push was enough to send him a couple of steps back in an attempt to regain his balancing, which gave her room enough to run deeper inside the smoke-filled hall, the cold coming from the open windows, the skulls of the dragons her ancestors had rode, dark shadows parting at her coming. What she saw made her sicken again. Her lord father was suspended by Valyrian steel shackles to the rafters as the green flame of wildfire danced beneath his steel-covered boots, flaming of furnace green his steel armor. Her brother, Viserys, stood at the feet of the Iron Throne, where her father sat laughing hysterically, maniacally, his hands, bony and harpy-looking, gripped over the pommels of the swords. His loyal Kingsguard, a Kingsguard that should have been composed by knights, stood by and watched. Lord Tywin Lannister was at the right of her brother, with his daughter, the Lady Cersei, present as well, her emerald eyes glinting like wildfire, her gaze intent and fixed. She looked to be the only lady present who didn't seem horrified by the execution, nor by the screams, only fascinated by the flame, her scarred cheek made even more prominent due the ill, green light that filled the room. "Father," she demanded, "what are you doing?" Two pyromancers with their hoods over their heads and their faces painted dark green and blood maroon were stalking the fire. Avalia pushed one of them, uncaring if her skirts took a flame due her vicinity with the fires. "Viserys," she shouted, "stop this madness," she demanded again, and her brother barely looked at her. "Have my sister brought back to her chambers," he ordered to one of his guards. "She won't be permitted to leave without my consent." But when the guard grew closer, Roderick appeared at her side, silent as a ghost or a shadow, his blade dripping blood. "Not another step," he dangerously shouted, his jaw clenched as he heard his lord scream. Vielle fell to her knees. "I beg of you, father," she pleaded, "stop this madness." She begged, "This is pure cruelty. I beg of you, stop this. You were a benevolent king once." Viserys stepped forth. "Being benevolent made our bannermen turn their backs on their king and imprison him," he declared. "House Stark broke faith. Lord Rickard must die." Her godfather's shouts as he slowly cooked in his armor stopped for a moment. "Do not bend," he screamed instead, to her. "Surely there are cleaner way to execute a traitor if his crime is confirmed," she pleaded. "Please." "No," her father laughed, "traitors deserve no clean death. Rejoice, daughter." He laughed, "We are being freed of the treachery of House Stark. I cannot reason with any of them," she realized, and no one would raise a finger for her good father who kept demanding she did not bend. She stood up, a clear purpose in mind, as Sir Roderick dispatched on one of the pyromancer who tried to stoke the flame still, which resulted in more agonizing shouts. "Do not bend!" Rickard screamed. "Winterfell." She turned and made to step closer to the fire when Jaime, stumbling in the smoke, managed to reach her, encircling her waist with his arms. "I know," he murmured when she trashed, demanding to be let go, "but you cannot risk it, Vielle. He's my good father." She screamed, "My husband, father." She trashed again and managed to take another step, the heat kissing her cheeks and becoming unbearable to Jaime as his hands, following her as she leaned forward, started to burn. Vielle used that to push him back with a hit of the back of her head. She almost fell head-on in the fire, but managed to keep her balance. She needed to free her good father. Roderick was by her side. The chains were kept by a Valyrian steel locket, and Vielle searched like mad the key as Roderick tried to break the lock with his sword but failed as it was Valyrian steel. Stark, at that cry the few remaining shadow guards that had survived the slaughter suddenly appeared in the great hall as Jaime tried to stop her from doing anything else. "Please, just wait," he had murmured. "I let them through," he said. "You must run, your good father is done for." "I won't let him die so." unharmed me. If no lord and no lady spoke against her father, neither did they try to intervene when her shadow guards attacked. Her good father's voice had grown incoherent, and in the agitation Jamie Whitecloak took a flame, sending him reeling back. Avilia used that to free herself of him. The pyromancer, alive, with rotten teeth and a crazy smile, held out the key. You can do nothing for him, Princess, he sang. The wildfire has already claimed him and you cannot reach him. A sword planted itself into his belly, and Avilia worked through the nauseating sensation to reach out and grasp at the key. The wind blowed harder as the smoke started to clear. Her eyes were filled with smoke and tears, and her throat had grown raw as her father laughed and her brother fought. She cared nothing for it, until she found, stumbling, a good spot to try and open the locket. Her father laughed. You cannot free him. Watch me, she called back instead, plunging her hand into the wildfire. She flinched when the flame, burning hotter than the sun, kissed her skin. She knew her resistance was good to fire. She had even started to build it up by training herself in the evenings, but wildfire ran hotter. She had less resistance to it. She managed to get the key into the hole, and with a cry she turned it, unlocking it. Her good father weight though made the chain slips through the holes in the rafters, and he fell into the flames to begin with. When she realized her mistake, though her father was no longer laughing, Vielle leaned her whole body into the flame, the end of her hair catching fire as she evoked some strength she didn't know from where to make her good father body roll out of the flames. Roderick came at her side, using his cloak to extinguish the flames from her hair and her skirts, her updo coming undone around her face. As she patted away the residual flames around the furnace-hot armor, she worked her good father helmet off, though she had to tear some of the flesh where the leather and metal latch had become one with her good father's skin, which made him cough out another cry. His eyes were bloodshot and he seemed to not be able to see her. Lord Ricard. Avilia, child, is that you? He asked, coughing, and Vielle realized he had become blind indeed, probably due the lack of good air to breathe inside the helmet as he cooked to his own death. I am here, father, she cried. I am so sorry. Hush, child, he coughed. The North remembers. He coughed again, holding out his hand to her, burned and become one with the metal gauntlet he had worn for his combat. Do not forget, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. You have to find a way back, to the pack. His voice died and Vielle saw his eyelidless eyes become dull and lifeless. No, she sobbed. I am so sorry, so sorry. She did not even realize some of the shadow guard, the two that had remained, were dragging Roderick away, but she was thankful for it. It meant they could remain alive, while she wasn't sure she might be able to save them if they were to remain. Her shoulders shook with sobs, her lips trembling as Jamie's hands wrapped around her, leading her face against his metal-clad shoulder. I'm so sorry. Hush, it's not your fault. She was barely aware of the court whispering on how she had been untouched by the wildfire as her father started to laugh again. Fire cannot kill a dragon, he screamed out, his voice shrill and filled with anxious, hysterical laughter. Fire cannot kill a dragon. I've lost too much time trying to reason with them while he seemed coherent. I should have acted immediately, she reprimanded herself. Shivering and sobbing a mess as her hair fell around her face, the tips burned, her eyes filled with burning, hot tears, her nails half bent back because of the heat they had faced, a small burn, minor in truth, the size of the key on her digits, her corset in tatters. I am flesh and I am bone, she shivered. She looked up. The worthy daughter of her father. He exclaimed, a dragon of Dragonstone, of old Valyria. This made her stand up on wobbly legs as she looked to both the crowd and then her father. I am a Stark of Winterfell, she seethed, and the North won't forget this day. She clenched her hands so hard that she felt the blood being drawn. She jutted her chin up proudly despite her tears. Nor will my husband, she added. Winter is coming, father, and in winter even dragons will know their end. Resume, Lyanna and Roriga marry anyway, to the disappointment of Rolla, who is planning to have Elia brought to Harrenhal together with Vielle, as Lyanna herself discovers by chance overhearing her and the spider talk. Benjen has some visions, the extent of which will be explained in the coming chapter, and when he returns to himself and as Maester Wallers tries to give him milk of the poppy, his skin changes and walks into the man, throwing him against the walls of the corridor head first. They manage to stop him but discover that Wallers had been trying to poison Benjen instead. Brandon has him thrown in the kennels and brings Benjen back to his room, now fainted. Vielle discovers her good father has had an audience with the king, who has later accused him of high treason because of his demands and because of Lyanna eloping with Roriga. Mostly it goes like in canon, only without Brandon. Vielle has her shadow guard attack the Great Hall and tried to reason with her father and brother. When that doesn't work, She exposes her resistance to fire by managing to get Ricard out of the flames, but it's too late. Ricard dies, telling her that she has to get back to the pack, and as Aeris declares she is a dragon as fire cannot kill a dragon, Vial tells him she's a Stark and that winter is coming. Roderick and a few of her shadow guards survive and flee to regroup outside the keep. Vial remains with Jaime in the keep, for now. Notes. So here we are, the pin has finally dropped. How has the letter Vial has written to Ned reached back to Aeris, when we know Ned sent word via Raven to Brandon? What will happen now? At this link you find the Crown's Party https://regina-ruby.tumblr.com/post/67871695466078209//new-chapter-of-dive-and-of-ices-up. As always, sending all my love. G. Chapter 34, Brandon X and Avilia 15. Summary. Winterfell and KL. The way our favorite couple is working as a team even at long distance. Notes. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Brandon X. Snow cloaked the blue frozen tops of Winterfell, a snow blizzard infuriated outside the warm walls of the keep, snowing the camp at his feet. It was no normal blizzard, the shamans had told him. It was as if the north was weeping and grieving. Let it not be. He could feel Charlotte stalking in the wolf's wood, hungering for blood, howling in the darkness. His good brother had never once left his side. He was still weak, but he was growing stronger by the day, and he had admitted to feeling like a caged animal, that he could feel that something terrible was about to happen, that he feared both for Lyanna and Avilia. He felt guilty of the fact that he had gotten wounded and had therefore not been there to keep them out of trouble while in Harrenhal. If he had been there, he would have gone with Avilia to King's Landing at the very least, and they would know her safe. Brandon had learned quite a bit about his wife's family that he had been unaware of. Roriger was distant and indifferent. He was either on Dragonstone, or he was focused either on his old tomes or in the training yard, when he wasn't occupied trying to sire a son from his wife. The way Selhino had phrased it, had suggested to Brandon that the lady, Princess Elia, might not have been very favorable to such a focused intent. He learned that Roriger had put his wife's health in jeopardy more than once, that after every miscarriage or stillborn before the time, he would get her pregnant much sooner than he was supposed to, by Maester orders, and that he had let the pressure on Elia end up suffocating her, to the point the sweet Princess Selhino had met when he had been introduced at court had lost most of her spark, but when she saw her daughter, Viserys was considered cruel, clever and half-mad already, but way too lucid for anyone else to consider him nothing less than the danger he was. He was as unpredictable as a barrel of wildfire, and he humoured every whim of their father the king. He shared in his whores and in their cruel pleasures. Selhino had made no mystery of the number of women who had died at their hands for their games, and he had disgraced more than a noble daughter, offering for compensation the jewels of the crown unbeknownst by his mother, the queen, yet supported by his father. Baelor, instead, was the only one Selhino half-trusted with Avilia's safety. He was pious and good, to his knowledge. He would have taken the faith if it was up to him, but their father the king had forbidden it. Baelor had even asked then that the faith militant was reinstated and to be named commander of it, a force loyal to the crown and to the faith. He had been refused. He had no vices that Selhino knew of, unless one counted as a vice his passion for the faith and the Seven. He would stand by Avilia if needed, even against his father and his brothers. Inez, to his not so evident surprise, was the one who preoccupied Selhino more. He is young, his good brother had told him, and highly impressionable, with only one wish to his name since the moment he has been old enough to understand what love was. Marry Avilia and make of her his lady wife. He had went as far as to ask her hand to their father the king, who had refused him on the grounds of Avilia having been considered, by the Maester, as incapable to bear living male heirs. Her blood is weak, Selhino had reported to him their father's words, she is not fit for any Dragoseed. Could he be able to do something drastic to have her? Brandon had asked, his hand gripped too tight around the table surface that when Selhino had not replied, enlightening his preoccupation on the matter, and thus an affirmative answer, the wooden surface had cracked under the pressure of his fingers. His wife, to Selhino reports, had been mostly unaware of the obsessive streak of Inez, whom, people rumored had his whores wearing wigs of silver and purple shadow over their eyes to resemble his sister. When asked, Selhino said he could not say for certain if these rumors had any truth, and that his brother seemed to him still a boy instead than a man, yet the thing brought concern over his face, suggesting he might believe it right. He looked over his brother, laying on his bedding, his forehead coated in sweat and his eyes closed so tight his whole face scrunched in displeasure. After the incident with Maester Waller's, Brandon had acted immediately by having the man apprehended and had let Mahonia take over his duties until a new Maester could be called to Winterfell. His lady mother had stayed by Benjen's side until Brandon had to demand that she visited the Godswood. He would not go into an interrogation blinded, especially about what may have befell his father south. Or his wife. Or his sister. He lowered his head and breathed out through the rage rising in his blood. A knock on the door made him almost jump in surprise. He turned to the door and collected himself before giving leave for whoever was outside to enter. The door cracked open, twinging on its hinges, and Mahonia peeked from behind its frame. It never ceased to amaze him how the children of the forest seemed always young, perennially unchanged. Mahonia had been around when Snowdrop had birthed the steam from which House Stark had rose even stronger than before. She had been around for hundreds of Brandon before him, yet now she looked as young as Lyanna was. Instead she was older than Winterfell. Child, there was a sweetness in her tone which made him flinch and falter altogether. He looked down to her big, black eyes and waited. You have to be brave now. Brandon closed his eyes and inhaled sharply. She was holding in her three-fingered hands a little scroll almost the same color as her spotted skin. Please, he prayed, let it not be what I think it is. Mahonia walked to him, slow and sure, her steps never faltering. When Brandon opened his eyes, she was so close that from where he was sat she looked into his eye and he could smell her floral scent. She handed him the scroll. I am sorry, child, she offered before stepping back from him after having let the little scroll befall in his outstretched palm. Brandon sighed, then unrolled the scroll and braved his chill to read the words. On the morrow of yesterday, Lord Rickard of House Stark, Warden of the North and Lord of Winterfell, has been apprehended on charges of high treason toward his grace, heirs second of his name of House Targaryen. He has demanded trial by combat and has perished against the king's champion. To the new Lord Stark, bend the knee. With the present to inform you that your marriage with Princess Avylia of House Targaryen will be annulled. Accept this decree or face the punishment of all traitors. Death. Prince Viserys of House Targaryen. One true heir to the Iron Throne. He closed his eyes once again, as the parchment rolled up again once he let it, crumpling it in his fists as tears burned into his eyes, his jaw clenched, his breath haggard. What has happened, Selhino asked brother. Brandon looked into his dark purple eyes, resembling his wife's much more greatly than any of her other siblings' eyes. He opened his mouth to reply, but found his throat raw as if he had swallowed acid and his throat had been burned raw. He tried again, but he could hear only the howling of his blood in his ears. The door was suddenly thrown open and Brandon whipped his head in his lady mother's direction. Upon one look at her, he knew what punishment he had inflicted upon her by demanding she saw. Her breath was haggard, her chest rising and falling, her breathing wheezing, her eyes overflown in tears, her face ashen pale and her hair made frizzy by the sudden cold that had befell over them. The North was weeping. It was grieving. Brandon stood up suddenly, the chair scraping on the dark floor, making to reach her, but before he could she fell into a curtsy, her hands clenched so strong they became white as ice, as she looked down. Tha and Tyrna Marb, is Father Bio and Tyrna, she murmured, her voice shaking. The Lord is dead, long live the Lord. Brandon felt his very being growing still and chilly at that, as Selhino looked at him astounded and his mother's grieving eyes rose to meet his again. Long live, my son, she stated, holding back a sob. Mother, he was in her arms in a moment, because in that precise instant, no matter that Brandon towered over her more than an head taller than any man and almost big enough he could engulf his mother without none being the wiser, he folded into her embrace, as any child would have of his mother. I know, my son, she said, collecting his tears, in that moment the only one who could do so, because the moment Brandon stepped away from her embrace he would no longer be her son, but her lord, the head of House Stark and officially the protector of the North. I know, she murmured brokenly, you must be strong now, we will have need of your strength before this is done with. They killed him. He felt like a child of 1 and 10, instead than a man, married and father and lord in his own name. They killed him. My son, she said, they have. And now winter will come for them. Her voice had lost its sweet quality, it was only iron. Only steel and we'll have justice, she told him, her voice demanding, her tone brokering no reply. You are our lord now. Ice and Winterfell are yours, she stated. She drew him from her embrace. But first, we must speak of what has happened in King's Landing. They sat together, and she told him of how his father had been apprehended on false charges of treason using a letter signed by a Valyar, a letter she supposedly had sent to Riverrun, the very same that had warned them of what was happening between Lyanna and Rhaegar. Someone must have intercepted it before Ned could read it, she told him, and only told him part of it. Maester Wallace was involved in it as well, she stated, her tone as cold as ice. Your father demanded trial by combat, she said. Brandon felt his blood run cold as she went on. Prepared himself to battle against a knight of the King's Guard or a prince, she stated, but that was not the champion the king had in mind. Her voice broke and Brandon helped her find her way to a seat. He knelt by her as she twisted her hands in her lap. Wildfire, she said at last. That was the chosen champion of King Aerys, she told him. They hooked him to the ceiling and above a brazier of wildfire. They wanted him to survive ordeal by fire, to prove his innocence. Brandon felt himself getting almost faint for the rage boiling up in his stomach. They burned him slowly inside his own armor, she said, finally breaking down into sobs as tears stroked down her pale face. He felt the fury surge in his blood, sing in his veins. And Vial, did Vial not object? He demanded. Did she just stay and watch as my father was slaughtered and murdered? His fury rose so high that his voice seemed to shake his mother very core, for she wasn't able to reply to him as Brandon started to pace. She didn't. Benjen's hoarse voice replied to him from the bed. He whipped his head back around to watch his brother, who was attempting to sit up against the bed headboard. Vial, he stated, wetting his dry lips, was sequestered in Maegor's holdfast. He told him she staged half a coup to get out of there and managed to save father, he reported, and Brandon felt his blood run cold. Had the mother of his children perished as well? No. It was impossible. She could not be dead. He would have felt it. He knew it. She must still be alive, otherwise his own heart would have ceased to beat. He would have moved himself by inertia alone, as her body grew cold as ice, until he could join her. His children could not be orphans of mother already. Once she reached the throne room, Benjen coughed. She demanded that they freed father, appeased to the court, but in vain, he said. In the end, despite the battle going on around her, she was forced to expose her resistance to fire in a desperate attempt to save father, he recounted. Tears streaming down his cheeks. She almost burned herself, he stated, to free him of the wildfire and the chains, but it was in vain. Father died in her arms. Brandon felt his heart break as he saw the sorrow in his brother's eyes as he took a deep steadying breath. She has renounced her Targaryen name, he stated. She's been sequestered in Maegor's holdfast again, a prisoner in all but name. His eyes were shining with tears as he told him that. His voice was hoarse, his throat apparently as raw as Brandon felt his own. Brandon felt the fury surging to such a great level that when he grabbed at the table for support it cracked under the pressure of his fingertips. His own wife had risked her life, had renounced her maiden name, to save his lord father, and now she was sequestered in her childhood home by her father, a cruel madman, and her brother, who as things stood, had decreed he wanted to annul their marriage. Over my dead body, Brandon swore, fingering the medallion at his neck, tracing the northern knot with one fingertip. She was his wife. She was his as he was hers, as they had vowed before the old gods and the new. The North had accepted her. She was a Stark of Winterfell, now, and they were trying to destroy their bond. They could not. He fisted his hand and punched the table with a roar of both pain and anger as the crack widened in the lucid surface of the wood. Selhino had started pacing as well, murmuring brokenly between himself that he had failed his duty to defend his sister, who was now alone in a pit of vipers worse than any serpent lair. They were trying to annul their marriage, and if they managed, not only they could marry a Valyar to whoever they pleased, if she didn't try her luck at them for that first, thus also bastardizing their children. Their two magnificent children, the future of House Stark. Brandon would not let that happen. He had let a Valyar part with him because he had thought they were having to do with reasonable, up to a point, people. He did not expect for them to maim one of their own. Wolves would never maim one of the pack, and a Valyar was now part of the pack. She was his. Brandon would get her back, through thick and thin, through heaven and hell, through winter and summer. He would get her back, and he would not part from her anymore. He would not let her leave his sight ever again. He would bind her to him with an Valyrian steel chain, unbreakable, so that they may never again try to separate them. Brandon, Benjen called, and he turned, his eyes fixed on his brother. A Valyar is swimming in dangerous, Treacherous waters, he said. They won't easily let her agency, he told him, but not everything might be lost. She has formed an alliance with Princess Elia of House Martell, and together they are forming a niche of supporters at court. House Tyrell, for one, is loyal to them for now, he stated. Brandon felt his face growing blank, as Benjen broke down in sobs. The fault was mine, he said. I had seen something, but his voice broke. I could not imagine Lyanna would, that Roriga would. Brandon strode to the bed and cupped the back of Benjen's head. You will tell me everything, he stated, his voice hoarse and filled with determination. Everything. You won't leave out a single detail, he said. We've been shielding you too much, and this is a direct consequence of your lack of training. He stood up, letting his head go, and turned to Mahonia. He shall begin his training at once, he stated. I don't care what you have to do, he must become an asset instead of a liability. He turned to his lady mother, but she was busy looking at him with that pitiful, sad expression Brandon could neither fathom nor accept. So he turned to Sir Selhino and his stormy purple eyes. Come with me, he stated. We have ravens to send, he said, a traitor to execute and a rebellion to lead. Are you here to kill me? He asked. His face was pale and sunken, but he looked otherwise fine, save for a shaking that Brandon could recognize well. It had done little good to him to be exposed to the cold, his clothes wet and his face bruised by all the times Benjen had him throw himself against the stone walls of Winterfell. Not yet, Brandon replied, stepping inside the cage in which they were keeping him, Selhino following him hot behind, his fury bristling just below the surface, much like his own. The man snorted. You're too craven for that, aren't you, Stark? He antagonized. You'd rather have the cold do the deed in your stead. Brandon huffed. Then, without warning, he surged forward, bended just enough to lay a mastodontic punch on the jaw of the man, the crack under his knuckles satisfying as the blood surging in his veins and thundering in his ears demanded. He straightened again. Maester Wallers massaged his jaw. You northerners, he stated, a bunch of brutes unfit even for this wild land. One of these brutes, Brandon pointed out, the least trained of them all, I would add, managed to walk into you like a puppet master and would have killed you had I not stopped him. I would be careful on how I speak if I were you. Why? Wallers demanded. I'm going to die anyway. Brandon nodded. But I can either make it swift and painless, or long and painful. It all depends on you. He squatted near him. So which one will it be? The man spat on the ground, and Brandon's sharp intake of breath was followed by a sigh. Hard way it is then, he commented. How long have you worked against us? He asked. Fuck you. The next punch took him in the gut, to the point the man had to bend to the side to retch the contents of his stomach. Shall I ask again, Brandon asked, or perhaps you'd like if I changed my question? How about, why have you helped Roriga Targaryen seduce my sister? Wallers laughed. It was throaty and raw. I did nothing of the sort. Your sister did it all on her own, he said. Like the bitch she is, she opened her legs to the dragon prince, who merely showed a modicum of interest on her. How's that for honor, Stark? Another punch. This time it was followed by an headbutt, courtesy of Sir Selhino. Brandon arched a brow at his good brother. My apologies. What are your goals, Brandon demanded. Why have House Targaryen spurn House Stark so? My wife is beloved in the north. She gave me 2 sons, we would have been happy. Maester Wallers spat blood on the hard ground. You are an unworthy cunt. The princess deserved better, he said. She deserved someone of Valyrian descent, her noble brother, who loves her beyond any measure. You were just a mistake around the corner. She does not belong north, she belongs in the south, where the sun shines always. Brandon lunged for him. Then she was happy here with me, he roared. We were happy and in love. Why destroy such a pure thing? Ah! Wallers exclaimed. We are all aware of your stunts, Stark. How long until you tired of her? Prince Inys has been in love with her since he was a boy. We were all expecting a betrothal and a marriage between them. You stood between them. Brandon gripped him from his hair. Valyria is my wife, he declared, his tone brokering no replies. The mother of my children and the Lady of Winterfell, he stated. Do you know what you helped bring forth? He did not await for an answer. The end of House Targaryen, he stated, because, believe me, Wallers, I will bring winter to them all. If even an hair is harmed on my wife's head, their corpse will feed my wolf. He stood up again and turned to Selhino. Have the dwarfs, shaman and giants reunited, he said. At the hour of wolf we kill the traitor. He did not speak further with his lady mother or his brother. He closed himself in the Lord's solar, the solar which had been of his father and was now his, with his good brother as they wrote to several other lords, hoping to create an alliance that would bring to its knees House Targaryen. He wrote to Riverrun and to Lord Tully in reply to the last raven received that very morning after news had reached them about the death of his lord father. Ned and his betrothed Lady Catelyn would marry as soon as it was proper, thus securing the support of House Tully and the Riverlands. He sent ravens to every keep, inciting them to unite against House Targaryen, though he knew many would turn a blind eye and a deaf ear. Ned had also written to him, telling him of how Lord Jon Arryn, his foster father, had been asked to surrender his and Robert head on a spike to Aerys and had refused rising the veil against the Iron Throne. Lord Tully demanded more than a second son for his eldest to convince him to rise in open rebellion against the crown. But if his eldest became part of the Stark family and his youngest daughter became Lady Arryn, he would stipulate an alliance against the crown and support them. Thus Lord Hoster had written to the Uri. Brandon did not like the tone of that missive. It almost sounded like until he received word of Jon Arryn having accepted this condition his brother might be held hostage just as his wife was. Thankfully by mid-afternoon they received the news that Lord Arryn had accepted the offer and would marry Lady Lysa Tully. Thus with both of his daughters married to strategic lords, Lord Tully offered his support against the crown. A missive from Robert Baratheon was already waiting for him when he took hold of his father's solar. Ned's best friend offered his support and declared that his betrothed, the Lady Lyanna, must have been abducted and that rumors about a marriage between the two of them were false, or that either she had been forced into a marriage by the Dragon Prince. Brandon could not say. He knew Lyanna had left willingly, but if they wanted to survive this they had to act as if either her act had been forced or she had been abducted to begin with, because Brandon did not want Rhaegar on the throne. Whether he had forced Lyanna or not, he was not letting her ride home, and every raven they had sent to Harrenhal had been replied with condescension until Brandon or his lord father bent the knee to him. So, whether Lyanna had eloped with him or not, he was successfully keeping her as an hostage, isolating her from her family. Brandon would accept Robert Baratheon's offer of alliance against the Iron Throne and they would march on King's Landing together, to dethrone Aerys and save Avalyar. If they managed they would also destroy Rhaegar and save Lyanna, if she wanted to be saved, that was. He spent several hours with the chief of the Children of the Forest, the representative of the clans of dwarfs as well of the shamans and panther men and women. The dwarfs would follow them south only to avenge Lord Ricard's death and demand the release of Lady Stark, but they would not fight against Prince Rhaegar since the girl had not been forced to elope with him, as she had made her own choice. The shamans shared this condition and Brandon could do nothing but accept it, though the giants cared not. They would fight together with House Stark whoever the enemy. The panther men and women were in accord to fight against House Targaryen and were the Children of the Forest, but both refused to attack Harrenhal and Lady Lyanna, unless her chosen partner, Prince Rhaegar, rose against them. His bannermen would follow him beyond the neck and to whatever hell they needed to. Everyone was keen on avenging Lord Ricard and demand the release of Lady Avalyar, especially the giants and the Children of the Forest, as well as his bannermen. The notion that she was the mother of the Stars of the North, of his twin sons, made it so that they believed she belonged north and that she was being held against her will by her lord father. What more, their sympathy became greater when they were told of how Vielle staged half a coup to try and save Lord Ricard, exposing her secret in a desperate attempt to save him and renouncing her Targaryen name in favor of the Stark one. That very night he executed Maester Warlers with ice and laid his severed head and body upon the altar. He pronounced the sacred vow before the heart tree and drew his own blood to ask the blessing of the gods and their protection for himself, his bannermen, his sons and his wife. He spent the night and the several nights that took before he left Winterfell to move against the Iron Throne, barely sleeping, his sons nestled against each side of his, held close to him as he prayed night and day that his wife was safe and nothing happened to her before he managed to reach her. The very morning that he was set to depart Winterfell, he received news by Roderick, who had barely escaped with his life and was now laying low in the lowest parts of the capital with few of the men who had survived Avalyar failed coup. He reported of what had happened and what his wife had been doing, supporting the ill and poor and gaining the trust of a new maester, Lewin was his name, to whom for his services, in hiding them and supporting her, Roderick suggested to grant the duty of becoming Maester of Winterfell as the lady herself had thought of, as well as building a niche of loyalist to her and her good sister Elia. It was thanks to this missive that he learned that the city was being mined with wildfire and that his wife had tried to spoil this plan of her father and brother by exposing such a plan in open court, thus gaining more allies to her cause inside of court. He mounted on his stallion that very morning to set out. Both him and Selhino would depart from Winterfell, where they left his lady mother and Benjen, who had begun his training with the Children of the Forest. his sons would stay behind as well, as they were the heirs to Winterfell. Hold on, love. I am coming. Avalia 15. Your Highness, you should wearing something less. Shara tried looking at her as the maids fastened the laces around her middle. Avalia flashed her a glare, her jaw set, hissing between her teeth. Something less stark, she demanded, her tone leaving no room for replies. Her lady-in-waiting gulped before gesturing for the gown she had laid out for her to wear. It was black with some, very unnoticeable, traces of red. Yet to Avalia it spoke of treachery. I mean, you've heard your brother, your Highness, she tried. It's not good to antagonize him so openly. Leave us, she demanded of the maids, and they curtsied and obeyed, leaving them and closing the door behind them, barring it from outside as Avalia had been sequestered in Maegor's holdfast since her good father's death. My princess. My name is Avalia Stark, she stated, her voice as if made of steel. I am to be addressed as such, she pointed out. With my good father's death, my husband must have taken his post as Lord of Winterfell, thus making of me his Lady Stark. But. No buts, Shara, she interjected, raising her hand to silence her. I will make my appearance at court exactly for this reason, she stated. Now help me with the fastenings of the corset. Shara looked half murderous but complied, though she protested again, unheard and in vain. When Avalia strapped at her hip the dagger Brandon had latched at her waist the day they had married, fingering the knot incised on the blade as a source of comfort. Together they left her chambers, her prison inside the very heart of the Red Keep, and were escorted to the Great Hall by a platoon of guards. Avalia did not bother to learn their names. She knew Viserys had them rotate so that she didn't have the chance to persuade them to her side. Her brother might be cruel and evil, but he was anything but clever, and at nothing helped Baelor plead to have her accorded the dignity of her status. They reached the throne room when the court was already in session. Her lord father was noticeably absent, but her brother, Viserys, occupied the Iron Throne, wearing a band of gold and rubies on his brow as Crown Prince of the Iron Throne, clad in the most magnificent silks and velvets of black and red. The Princess Avalia of House Targaryen, the valet announced her, and Avalia stepped forward, her jaw set and her face blank as she fell into a curtsy. My brother, she saluted. You've summoned me, she commented. Viserys made to open his mouth to speak, but she interjected before he could. I answer this summon in good faith, but any further summon addressed to Princess Avalia Targaryen will be henceforth ignored, she stated. If you, or our father, has any wish to summon me, he shall do so using the proper title of Lady Avalia Stark. A low murmur filled the court, and Avalia straightened her shoulders and jutted her chin up, her purple eyes sparkling as she faced his furious expression. You are a princess of House Targaryen, he pointed out. And I am a Stark of Winterfell through marriage, she pointed out. As of the last week, my husband has become Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and as such I should be addressed as properly as Lady Stark, she stated, clasping her hands before herself, hoping her choice of colors was a clear indication of the resolution of her statement. There will be no need for that, Viserys declared, his eyes glistening with fury, because as of now, he stated, I hereby declare your marriage to Lord Brandon of House Stark as null. He said, thus you are Princess Avalia of House Targaryen. Avalia stood unflinching. You do not hold the power to tear asunder my marriage vows, brother, she pointed out. It is not your word which makes my marriage null or not, she stated. You can't knock me down, brother. I do, he stated. She cocked her head to the side. On which grounds? Jaime, present near his father and his snickering sister, to whom were afforded places of honor in the court, mumbled something. Avalia did not manage to catch the mouthing, but she could imagine he was frustrated by her lack of compliance, as it was extremely dangerous. On the grounds of it, Viserys started, only for her to interrupt him again. My marriage was consummated, she pointed out, and the favor of the gods for such an union made clear when I birthed two healthy and robust sons, where the Maester all agreed I could only carry daughters, and at great peril for myself. She stepped forth. On which grounds, I ask again, do you claim the right to annul my marriage? Our father wills it, Viserys debated. Our father is not above the gods, she stated, unless he has more convincing grounds that you do. She said, he cannot declare my marriage null and bastardize my children either. A pregnant silence befell the court of sudden, and Viserys sneered. Lady Shara, he called forth, you were present at the marriage of my sister, can you attest that everything was done as it ought to, he asked, and there was a light in his eyes Avalia disliked. She looked at Shara and discreetly shook her head, but her lady-in-waiting curtsied. My prince, she stated. What do you ask of me? I've heard troubling news, you see, sister, Viserys pointed out, like the fact that you married that barbarian during a savage ceremony before his old gods. Is it true, he asked, turning to Shara and Avilia, innerly cursed. Of course. Varys had conveniently disappeared from court, but his whispers must have reached the wrong ears at the wrong times if her brother was privy to such matters. I cannot say it was savage in any way, Shara tried miserably, and Viserys urged on. No, he asked, do you deny my sister was part of a blood ritual, that she cut her own palm to join it with her husband's? Avilia fisted her hands to her sides, the light, pink scar on her palm a comforting memento, but now also a condemning proof. Actually, Viserys smirked. Why don't you dispel any doubt and show us your unmarred hands? In that moment she was thankful of her lesser resistance to wildfire, for her hands had been burned, thus both her palms were covered in little burns that concealed her scar pretty well, though she could trace it blind if needed. She raised both her hands. I would, should you, brother, if there was something to be showed, she commented, and what more, House Targaryen itself engages in blood exchanges as the one you claim at the base of my marriage to bond or sanctify alliances. It would be no reason enough to raise doubts about the truth of my marriage. Viserys smirked. No, he stated, I suppose not, if everything else was done by the book. I hear that Winterfell lacks a September and a Septon, he commented. My husband and I married before the Heart Tree, she stated. I am sure many houses still would define as legal any marriage done before the Heart Tree in a godswood. Fair enough, Viserys commented, and Viel knew by his look that he was working her in a corner. Yet, I've heard that you were not married in front of the Seven, is it true? We did the cloak and the ribbon ceremony, Avilia stated. We said the words. Viserys arched a brow. Did you, he asked, before turning to Shara. Did they, he asked. As far as I know, House Stark still marries the old way. They did, my prince, Shara replied, but her voice sounded doubtful even to her ears. They said the words and did the cloaking ceremony. And did they vow by the father, Viserys interrupted, by the smith and the warrior and the mother, the maiden and the crone and the stranger? Did they? Shara bit her lip. Did they? Viserys urged, by now on the edge of his seat on the Iron Throne. Careful there, brother, Avilia commented. You may fall and harm yourself on one of the swords, she said. A chuckle went through the court. We said the words, she stated. You have no grounds to base off an annulment. I did not ask you, he stated. I've asked Lady Shara, whose family has always been greatly loyal to us. The not even so veiled threat to Shara family was the final push her lady needed. They said the words, she said. They did not name the gods, but said the words anyway. Avilia closed her eyes. Viserys leaned back against the throne and smirked. It looks to me like I do indeed have grounds to annul your marriage. Better yet, it was void to begin with. Was it, Avilia demanded. Then why did the gods bless us with 2 healthy and robust sons when I was supposed to have only daughters? This point is moot, he considered. Our father has already executed the ignorant men who made such an assessment without proper trial, he commented. He clapped once. Thus I think the whole realm and faith would agree, your marriage is void. Avilia pressed her tongue against the back of her teeth as she considered her surroundings and her possibilities. She could not risk her children to be bastardized. She would die before she married anyone else, but she could not die with her sons bastardized. They needed to be Starks for her to leave this world with as little regrets as possible. Very well, she stated. I agree some things could be considered shady, she commented, damning Brandon for not listening to her and including part of the faith of the Seven ceremony without the naming of the gods. But we were declared married before the eyes of men and the old gods and the new. There are precedents, she added, and never before the marriage has been considered void, she pointed out, as the deceased Lady Locke could attest, she commented, recalling that the late wife of Lord Locke had been from the Riverlands and had kept the faith of the Seven but had married like she had before the Heart Tree. If you insist on considering the validity of my marriage, I am open to any inquiry, but I demand as my right that my case is entrusted to a council of expert. Lord Tyrell stepped up. Then my prince, he called, this could be a good compromise, he stated. The lady is clearly well disposed to face such a matter in a pious and legal manner, and the lords and ladies of this court would be better disposed to accept the verdict if it came from experts on the matter. Many other lords and ladies stepped up, commenting their assent. Sir Lewin Martell was the only one who commented on how the precedents would simply suggest the matter already closed as a valid marriage. Viserys, confronted with the whole court showing solidarity to her request, let out a frustrated breath. Very well, your case will be studied by experts. A council of experts, Avilia specified 14 members, she stated, 7 septons and 7 maesters, 1 from each region, to have the more just verdict we can hope for. She arched her brow at her brother. I would think it reasonable on my part to ask, More inquiry should go in such a matter. After all, you are attempting to bastardize the heirs to Winterfell. It would go a long way to show your just nature to act accordingly to my request, brother. You might have cornered, but I've cornered you right back. Very well. Viserys was forced to concede. Avalia offered him an hollow curtsy, but neither I nor you will choose the men supposed to judge you, he stated. The High Septon will name the Septons, and the Great Maester of King's Landing will name the Maesters. Agreed, she hissed, her courtesy a chilly armor. Until the moment of the verdict I shall be addressed as Lady Stark, and I will no longer be held sequestered in Maegor's Holdfast. You won't leave Maegor's Holdfast, Viserys countered, nor the premises of the Red Keep, he added, but he conceded. You will be addressed as Lady Stark. His face looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. Avalia cocked her head to side. Half a victory it was, but an important half a victory which gained her time to organize herself better. Agreed. Viserys nodded. Very well, he stated, waving a hand. Take your place. Court is still in session and the realm does not revolve around you, he commented. You will be escorted back to your chamber later. Meanwhile you will stand your post, showing your support to your family. Avalia fisted her skirts in her hands and offered an elegant bow, gesturing widely enough that the gray of her gown could be passed unnoticed by anyone. As you say, she commented, taking the side of the chamber. Notes. So, Brandon is ready for war. And the last faction has been finally formed, the rebels, and the war is not unavoidable. Meanwhile in Kael, Avalia has managed to outsmart her brother again, but how long will her trick do the trick? How long before something worse happens? As always, hope you enjoyed. I also wanted to thank you all for following, bookmarking and commenting on this story. I've had a couple of very busy weeks, but it's also thanks to your support and feedback that I remain motivated to write. So thank you all. As always, sending all my love, G. Chapter 35, Catelyn I. Summary. Riverrun. A double marriage. Notes. Sorry for the delay, enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Catelyn I. She brushed Lysa's hair, feeling the knots coming undone under the comb, and as her tresses laid loose and bright, a red so fiery when the light caught it looked like liquid, melted, white-hot iron. Her sister had a very fitful sleep, and Cat could not blame her. Both of them had been very close with Petter, and him laying on the brink of death in such a situation, it was helping no one. But, she reminded herself, he had been the one to challenge Lord Eddard to a duel, for her hand of all reasons. You do not want to marry him, Cat, he had told her, when Cat had pleaded with him to stop his folly. Lord Eddard was already a patience end, especially with his Lord Father's hasty execution. No, Catelyn reminded herself, it had not been an execution, it had been murder. Petter had been lucky that Lord Eddard's ears had not been deaf at her pleading when Petter had refused to yield even after having been almost cut open from the belly to the neck. She had turned her head away from the bloody mess that Petter had been, especially as Lysa had flung herself off the stairs in a rush to get to him, crying and bellowing. Not even their father had been able to calm her down, not until the Maester had started tending to Petter. Lord Eddard had even apologized to her Lord Father for having gone too far with Petter, but her Lord Father had admitted he had acted with honor, and it made Catelyn love him all the more that he had stopped just because she had asked. He had even apologized to her for having exposed to her to such a sight, and Catelyn had felt her heart flutter in her chest when she had cupped his face in her hand, something almost improper, that she had not engaged in until then, and he had leaned into her touch if for a second, before wrapping his hand around her wrist and removing it from his face. But he had not let go of her hand, and eventually Catelyn had intertwined their fingers, and he had flushed a bit. I won't marry him, Lysa opposed for the umpteenth time. Catelyn sighed. Lysa, she tried. Her sister spun around, her eyes red and puffy, glazed over and filled with angry tears, her nose snotty and red as she dragged the sleeve of her dress under it. It is our duty. How can you marry that vile, dishonorable, apathetic, ruthless man who dared to harm my Petter? Her voice broke in her throat as Catelyn gave a small tug to her hair. Ow! Lysa exclaimed, bringing both her hands to her head and then snatching the comb from her hand and throwing it on the floor with a clattering. How dare you, she started, but Cat held up her hand. Her Lord Father often said that Lysa might have looked like their Lady Mother, but that Cat acted like her, and something about the lingering respect that Lysa had held for their mother kicked in when Cat rose her hand in the air to silence her. How dare you insult Lord Eddard in such an untrue and brazen fashion? She demanded instead. He is to be your good brother, my lord husband, she reminded Lysa, and he has had enough honor and enough care for me to stop the duel even if Petter refused to yield and honor demanded he took his life, she told her. Stop speaking lies, it is not becoming, she stated, her tone firm and filled with resolve, even though she felt shaky as Lysa's eyes filled with tears of the new lady of the Uri, she added. She pursued her lips and Caitlin sighed, then leaned down to collect the comb up. I do not want to marry him, she cried. He is old, and unkind. Do not speak lies, Lysa Cat reproached her again. Lord Jonarin might be older than you might have wished, but he is a good man. Lord Eddard has lived with him for years, and Lord Orin has been the first to rise against King Aes when he demanded Lord Baratheon and Lord Eddard's heads, she reminded her. Lord Eddard says he is kind and gentle, one of the best men he ever knew. She started to brush at her hair again. Lysa wept. He's old, she said. I want Petter, she wept. Caitlin felt her heart break for her little sister. Lysa, she murmured, clasping her hand over her shoulder. Lysa wept deeper. Petter is like a brother to us, she reminded her. He cares about us, she added, but he could not be your husband, you know this. I want him, I don't want Lord Orin. Sister Caitlin knelt by her side, looking up in Lysa's red eyes. Lord Orin will make you a fine husband and make of you a high lady of a great keep in your own right as his lady wife. You know what our Septa says. All men are beautiful, we must find the beauty in them, she reminded her. Lord Orin is kind and gentle, and it is our duty to obey our Lord Father. Lysa wept but did not oppose anymore. Caitlin called for the Septa then, to help them prepare. Lord Brandon host, no, Lord Stark's host had arrived 3 days prior, and a week ago had arrived Lord Orin with the Knights of the Vale and Lord Baratheon. They had put off the wedding long enough. Lord Baratheon was on edge, for he wanted to battle against the Targaryen forces and save Lady Lyanna, and Lord Stark had seemed stern but gentle when Caitlin had met him when they had stopped in Riverrun during their road back to Winterfell. A man whose eyes filled with mirth and love at the mention of his wife and his beloved children. Privately Caitlin had found him perhaps more handsome than Lord Eddard, if a bit too rough for her tastes, and had privately wished that her lord husband would grow to look at her with the same softness Lord Stark had in his eyes when he spoke about his lady wife. Now though Lord Stark had this relentless edge, he almost never left his direwolf side. The beast was immense, and it had been a century since one had been seen south of the wall, much less south of the neck, yet there it was. Big, imposing and black, all fur and claws, and fangs, with a terrible gash over the snout. So big that if Lord Stark himself was such a tall man he could have rode him in battle. He was followed everywhere by dwarfs and shamans, people the South had almost forgotten existed, and he spoke to them firm and commanding. And they yielded. Dwarfs and shamans did not speak to anyone else but to Lord Eddard, as he was a Stark. They seemed to prefer to remain in their camp, and her father rather it so as well, for they were difficult and bold as well as rude. They seemed to favor the men of House Karstark, and Lord Eddard had studied her calmly when she had commented on it, before explaining to her that they did so because the dwarfs lived near Carhold and thus held the Karstark almost in as much regard as they did the Starks. Lord Stark had even brought south giants from the plains of the north, and someone rumored even children of the forest, and after Caitlin had seen giants and direwolves and dwarfs south of the neck, why not children of the forest as well? The maids helped them don on their house colors. Lysa wore a gown of dark red and blue, while Caitlin wore silver and blue. They would marry before the heart tree, all 4 of them would join their hands before a septon and the heart tree the Starks worshipped, and would marry before the old gods and the new. Their lord father and brother would walk them to their new spouses and lords, and together they would say the vows. And with their wedding not only 3 houses would be joined, but a new alliance would be formed against the Mad King. Lysa had stopped crying, though she sobbed through the whole ordeal of being helped into her dress and almost tore her maiden cloak apart when the Septa tried to put it around her shoulders, but in the end she relented. Her eyes so sad that Caitlin felt her own stomach become of stone at the look her sister reserved her, before their lord father knocked on their chamber for the begin of the ceremony. It was mid-morning by the time the brides made their way to the Godswood of Riverrun where the ceremony was to take place. Her brother Edmure had joined them too and had been the one to escort her. Rows after rows of lords, Stormlanders, Northerners and Rivermen as well as Valimen, parted to let the brides through. The path that cut to the heart tree had an earthy smell that Caitlin associated with Lord Eddard, as they had often taken long strolls around the Godswood. Caitlin did not visit it often before his arrival. It was not much bigger than a garden, and she kept the 7, but it held some kind of loveliness, she supposed, though she felt a bit like a stranger walking its paths. They walked through the elms and the bushes of wild flowers, white and pink and yellow and teal, painting the world in the colors of spring, even though the cold had started slithering back into the woods. Lord Arryn and Lord Eddard were waiting for them with their witnesses. Lord Arryn was clad in rich colors and fabrics, a testament to his wealth, though Catelyn found disdainful that he would marry in lesser colors than his own, no matter how rich the fabrics. It was, perhaps, a way to remind the world that he had not chosen to marry Lysa out of love or a match chosen in quiet times, but because he had been basically forced to gain their Lord Father's support. Lysa was nothing if not young and beautiful, and Catelyn knew how sweet her sister could be, so she had no doubt that, once the sadness was washed away by the bliss of her new status as noble wife and not just daughter anymore, she could gain the proud lord's affection, especially if she managed to give him a son, the heir he so desperately lacked. Lysa was beautiful, if sad. She wore her dark blue gown very well, and her red hair was bright and framed in a beautiful braid her pale face. Her eyes were still red-rimmed and a bit puffy, but the lavender moisture the maids had applied had made them look less swollen. She walked steadily if a bit floppily by their Lord Father's side, refusing to look at him in the eye. She looked at her husband-to-be and his rich fabrics, and Catelyn could see a flash of irritation in her eyes at finding the clothes he wore luxurious and pleasing to look at. Lord Eddard, on the contrary, had donned on the simple northern garb with direwolf's pins at his shoulders keeping his cloak in place. He looked, perhaps, less polished than Lord Arryn, yet Catelyn found him lovely enough to fill her belly with warmth. And while she